This is a new episode of Summoning Insight. It's actually a live episode right now. Anything could happen. In the next sentence, I could end both our careers and the whole channel. Maybe even Twitch itself comes tumbling down. Who knows what I know, think, or could express on the internet. The joke being, that's just Monty's internal dialogue every time a show starts. So
that's true. And yet I've done this 200 times. Some people call me crazy.
Exactly. Right. So obviously this show is brought to you by Esports Bet, the industry's leading crypto odds matrix. Now, here's the thing, Monty. Whenever I hear the name or word matrix, I immediately think of the classic movie from the year 1999 that redefined the sci-fi genre. And when I think about sci-fi, I think about one of the classic sort of tropes of sci-fi is the idea, not just time travel, it's time travel specifically to go back and redo something. Like think of that movie, Edge of Tomorrow, the one where it was Tom Cruise and he was in, it's actually a pretty good movie if people haven't seen it. Even though it was a blockbuster movie, it had a great plot. Essentially, the premise was it was like a PlayStation game where you use the save point over and over again and you keep trying to do it right the next time. So what I was thinking was, in real life, we'd all love that technology, the ability to try something, and if we fail, go, whoa, mulligan, do over, and then go back. Well, you know what? Esports Bet actually has a risk-free first-time bet. Now, here's the thing. You can't keep going back in time like Tom Cruise over and over and over again and doing the same thing. Oh, wait, am I thinking of Mission Impossible sequels? Anyway, so because that'd be ridiculous.
Some of those are actually good.
Some of them are all right. They're all right. But here's the thing. They're just a fucking whacked out 2000s version of Man from Uncle, mate. We solved that one in the UK, but basically they have a risk-free first-time bet on Esports Bet. So if you go there, make a bet up to 100 USDT in value. If you lose it, you just go to the Discord, discord.gg/esportsbet. You message the mod mill, say you did the risk-free first-time bet. They will credit your account up to the 100 USDT initial stake. Spoiler, we often recommend do it on an underdog match. Like if you'd have listened to us last week with the KT versus SKT, it would have been perfect. This week we had D+, picking up, I mean, they were actually a favorite, but they were like a 1.7. So again, like nice odds. Like you couldn't have lost either way on that one because you had the risk-free bet. Anyway, there's also another feature exclusive though to us here at Last Free Nation. Now, I actually thought to myself, Monty, you're going close to the line here, mate. You should never be disrespectful with the sponsor deliverable because that might actually turn public opinion against it. So look, I don't know why you've been so disrespectful. You've arranged for a match of the week, and it's the two best teams from LCS, but they're such a weak region. You're considering this the match of the week. Like they're two of the finest teams in that region. Oh shit, I misspelled it. Oh, it's match of the week. So what's the match of the week, Monty?
Yes, it's WEEK, not WEAK. That was your mistake. Yes. However,
it's the extra E that makes all the difference, as an old Team Liquid house once told me. That's a fucking fire piece of law. Go on.
So the match of the week is EG versus C9 this week. And what it means, guys, is that if you place a bet on this match, and it only counts for your first bet on the match of the week every week, and you have to have used our referral link, which is below, to sign up, you can get an extra 10% profit if you are correct, up to $100 in USDT, or the equivalent of 100 USDT in another cryptocurrency /DJT. So you can get it for playing for free with DJT as well. That means if you get, of course, 1,000 back, and then you would max out your 100 USDT. But this is C9 versus EG. As of yesterday, it was at 1.6 for C9, which is very good odds for a favorite. So on Competitive Edge, which is our show where we place these bets, which is on the Esports Bet YouTube channel if you want to check that out. And 2.2 for EG. So you might want to take that underdog bet on EG, because certainly not a lock for Cloud9, especially in best of ones and with EG's performance. If JoJo can do really well in that mid lane, that might be a ticket for EG victory. But yeah, we'll be doing this every week. And remember, it only counts for your first bet, so you can't make like 15 bets and get 10% on all of them, guys. Obviously, that goes without saying. But it is a great promotion from Esports Bet, and we will be doing these weekly in both League and when CS starts up again, CSGO. So enjoy.
And spoiler, if you're looking at this split, like they're not going to go undefeated, but Cloud9's going to lose very few games. Already they're 1.6 odds, like Monty says. So if you get the 10% on top, you're actually laughing on that one.
Yep. Yeah. Really good. And like if you had gotten the 2.8 or 3.0 odds on KT last week on our match of the week, really crazy. Really crazy stuff. You could do very, very well. But yeah, let's move into this week of competition. I guess we have to do the thing that we always do, which is we get to talk about the things that absolutely no one else is going to talk about because they are controlled by Riot. And that, of course, is the latest with Hanwha Life and Clid. So Clid has been accused, I'm going to try and get my language correct here, of sending sexually harassing messages to women via KakaoTalk, which is the messaging app that everybody in Korea uses. And a lot of these have now been posted online by these individuals on Twitter. Looks like there's a couple of different individuals. The journalists in South Korea are picking up on this. Again, none of this is confirmed at this point in time, but Clid was in fact benched for a substitute jungler in Grizzly in their match versus D+ Kia, which they lost last night. I have not seen these matches yet, obviously, because we are recording this at 8 a.m. So I have just woken up and haven't had a chance to review those games yet. But this is an instance that's probably really going to affect Hanwha, and the team is still doing their own investigation. Haven't heard anything, of course, from LCK, but they have a ghost commissioner, so don't expect to hear anything at any point in time from them. And yeah, it seems like it's pretty serious with the Korean community.
I mean, the real problem with this whole topic is we should actually give you some cultural background here, which is one, because they are like a Confucian society where it's all about face, it's about honor and what is the public perception of who you are and what you represent, etc. That's the reason why they're coming down on this topic like harder than a ton of bricks, like ridiculously hard. Even though you'll notice, as far as I can tell from what I was reading translated, Monty, nobody has accused this person of like raping someone or even meeting the people and doing anything. It's essentially just the idea he sent inappropriate messages to fans, presumably female fans. And then the other thing is, this is also why it's difficult to talk about a story where the language it's in is in a different language and I have to rely on translations and what news leaks out. Like, guess what? I'm not scouring DC Inside or Foremost or whatever website they're all on over there in Korea. So I don't technically know the full story. So from the little I've seen, I would just say this. There's two things. One is culturally in Korea, even though they are absolutely a work hard, play hard culture, and spoiler, there are a bazillion businessmen going to bathhouses and all sorts of things and high class celebrities, people like, in fact, I'd even say, this is why we can talk about this topic and other people can't, I'd even say that's a fucked up sort of like extrusion of how extreme the work culture is and how extreme the face culture is. It's more like, instead of being like Amsterdam and just being like the red light district, which technically they do have in Busan, they have certain red lights around areas around the beach, I noticed, but in theory they don't publicize it, right? What you do there is you do your work hard, you're a businessman. If you choose to go and do something like that, it's more like, you know, a place that you go to, it's like an unmarked building, you make an arrangement. In theory, they're just going to like wash you and it's going to be like a spa thing. But the point is, everyone knows what's going on there, basically. But the point I'm getting to is, just because people are doing it does not mean it is publicly accepted or anyone will admit to it. So to me, you already see they have a very strict hierarchy of rules within Korea anyway. So on this main topic, as far as I can tell, I can't know all the messages. Some of it, quite frankly, just looked like sexting, fair, as in like what you would expect if pro players and fans interact with each other, and then some of them, men and women, have the crossover where they start getting a bit naughty. The problem with that for me always is, one, you have to know what the whole log is. Like, is the guy just saying some weird shit out of nowhere, and before that it's just sort of like, hey, I'm your fan or whatever? That's an issue for me. Then there's the whole thing that, like, I do think it's really dirty if the person who themselves was on the other side of it was actually into it or encouraging it, but then later they sort of retract. Like the idea, first of all, you don't need consent as far as I can talk something like that, but the idea you can retract it later seems a bit okay. But then the last thing I will say, and this is the most important thing to listen to if you are a young player in esports, is this is what you call an asymmetric relationship. And you better learn what that fucking term means immediately, because you are going to get brutalized. So the problem is this: that person is not the same as you. They are not going to be treated the same as you. And they definitely have no professional expectations as accompanied with what they're messaging you. So even if in that scenario, it seems like, well, they were messaging me that way, I replied to them, they sexed it up a bit, I got a bit cheeky. It doesn't matter. They're not a pro player. So they're not going to be punished. They're not going to be shamed. Well, I don't know, potentially, I guess, for fans could be horrible to them. In theory, they don't have as much to lose. So in that scenario, pro players have got to learn. Even though, yes, take being a pro player out of it. Maybe you're a 19-year-old player. Clid's much older, but I'm just giving a random example here. Maybe that's a 19-year-old girl. To you, it might just seem like what's good for the goose is good for the gander. But it's a different set of circumstances. And I'd also just say generally, Like, you have to just realize, like I say, the person, if you're being honest with yourself, the main reason they contacted you was because they're a fan of yours in some way. So that already was lurking in the background. What is it? It's not as simple as just being like, well, I'm 19, they're 19. Not really. Like, the main reason they reached out to you is because you in some way are a figure of higher esteem in their mind, or the fact that you're a pro is what's making you cool, you're competent or something. So I think it's a really complicated topic. As far as I can tell, it doesn't look great from the Clid side. It looks like he said either embarrassing stuff, or maybe he was being a little bit sexually provocative. It doesn't seem like a massive scandal to me, but again, I understand the cultural sort of lay of the land, as it were. It doesn't surprise me that way.
Yeah, I mean, I think it just depends on what other information comes out from this. I think on its face right now, the thing is, you just don't know how deep the rabbit hole goes, right? And allegedly, one of the two women that has come forward was a minor at the time.
That's like a big problem as well.
Yeah,
You also don't know all these people are. That's why I would in general say don't message anyone like
right.
that.
And like, are there pictures that are being exchanged here, which are obviously, potentially illegal? Did this ever get into real life? And so it could be the tip of the iceberg. Like, we just don't know what the effect of this is. And like, that is, we just have to wait for more information to come out and for them to actually talk to these people and do some sort of investigation as to whether it went beyond what we have seen translated and what the context of that is. But in the meantime, it's obviously just going to affect Clid's ability to play the game, which, if you're a Hanwha fan, a lot of people, might like the fact that Clid is gone, but Clid was one of the major voices and shot callers within this roster. Sure. And even though his individual play was kind of lackluster this year, and he did make quite a few misplays, you have to say. He had a lot of hints. Is a substitute jungler this late in the year going to be able to revive their chances, especially one that may not have significant experience? Are they going to sign a new, more veteran jungler? Obviously, we talked about Dread like a million times, just sitting out there doing nothing as far as we can tell right now. Or are they just going to take, kind of throw in the towel on the season and take an amateur jungler and just see what happens with Grizzly in that position? But yeah, it is looks like quite the scandal that is unfolding right now, and it's not, I think, unprecedented. People have brought up the fact that players like Aiming have been in similar situations in the past years ago. So yeah, I guess we'll just have to wait for the team and the league to make some sort of decisions over this, and hopefully they can get to the bottom of it quickly. But for those of you guys who are wondering, that's what's going on. It is purely from a competitive perspective, unfortunate, because right now on the whole in the LCK, it is looking really kind of top heavy, the league. And this was a team that might have been able to make it to Worlds and probably will not. Probably will not, based on those circumstances. I wouldn't even necessarily say they had an outside chance, really, because with the state of play right now and 4 teams going, it's kind of like between them and D plus Kia. So it's like 50% chance, really, unless some miracle happens with like Kwangdong or Live Sandbox, which
the biggest winner from this is Damwon, without a doubt. They just made their chances of going so much better. Whereas, like, I would have still been a bit nervous if they'd have been in that last BO5 to make it there, That'd have been clenched a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, Hanwha did better in the playoffs in spring than we expected them to do. So they did step up, I guess, a little bit, when it matters. They did beat D plus 3-1 and eliminate them. So had that playoff bracket, been there at the time, they would have made top. I mean, they did make top 4 in spring, even though they were the 5th seed to D plus's 4th seed at the time. So, yeah, I mean, it is probably going to, make LCK rather predictable, I would say, going forward, especially because D plus did in fact take that win over Hanwha this morning, 2-0. So
if you're a fan of Viper, it's just been suffering for like a whole fucking year now. Like, please, just get him on a better team. Get on a better team. He's the new trophy, bad teammate choice. The fuck?
Well, he did this to himself. Like, he did sign a contract knowing that he was going to be playing with all of these players. Right.
Probably so high off all the fucking come back to Korea, money. He won Worlds a while back. So he's like, yeah, whatever, I'll stick with fucking year. You fucked up, homie. You fucked up.
I mean,
all I'm
I
saying is this. Think about it logically. There's a world where maybe he could have been on Damwon, mate. Imagine that lineup. If he was in death spot on Damwon, that'd be fucking banging.
I mean, Deft is doing well. I don't know if that's the core problem with D+, but I mean, he also could have been. I mean, the Gumayushi stands are going to come after me, but he could have been on T1 as well. He could have been on KT.
Stands. Do you know that thing where they had like one trophy ever? Like, what are we fucking talking about here? Like, I don't get it, mate. If you at what point in time does he ever get blame? I don't get it, mate. Everyone's been treating Gumayushi like who's the best ADC in the world for like 3 years now. It's what mental. What?
It's because T1 has K-popified themselves, where that's the kind of branding that the team has put the players into, and the players have opted into themselves. So now everybody thinks they must protect the precious T1 players from everything. It's very annoying. It's very annoying.
The one thing I do find weird though is obviously he's Innovation's brother, but Innovation was mega nerdy looking. Gumayushi is like a fucking male model, mate. It's ridiculous. Have you seen that jawline? He looks fucking fire, mate. He must, must be one of those like twins type scenarios, like the Arnold Schwarzenegger, Danny DeVito movie. I know which way all the genetics went. All the clutch gene went to Innovation. All the looks went to fucking Gumayushi. There you go. Figure it out for you.
Guess who's made more money in his career, Thorin?
There you go.
It's Gumayushi, because he was in a bigger game. His brother Innovation was there before the big money came into esports. So.
Yeah, but he did it all on his own, mate. The other guy was getting fucking carried. Innovation just had to win. There's only me here. Oh, I've got to just win it all, have I, right? 70% win rate across the board. That'll just be me then, being a god. Great.
Oh, man. But yeah, do you want to talk about the telecom war a little bit to kick this off? Because a lot of people didn't expect that KT, even though I told you all that they were actually the favorite going into this match, would be able to take down T1, but that has been the result, and it was a pretty convincing 2-0 from KT.
I mean, I also, first of all, whenever these teams play historically, it doesn't matter what the roster is for KT, which is usually the weaker of the two. Inexplicably, it is always just a really good game. But then also, anyone who saw last spring in the playoffs, that upper bracket match was fire. And that was the one where, as we talked about previously, KT were like that far from winning that. They would have been in the finals. They would actually be a guaranteed MSI team. Like, that could have been bonkers. Obviously, they lost. Yes, they then bombed it through the lore and didn't do all they should. But like against SKT specifically, this team just seems to match up so fucking well. And also, we talk about it every time. If you even just go by the players, they have like amazing strength at all three laning positions. Like, some of these players, I can tell some of these guys are still at fucking Live Sandbox Prince territory, Monty. Where it's like, I can tell who doesn't watch LCK. Because if you think these are just like no-name players, first of all, one of them is like a mega decorated champion. One used to be one of the best players on a bad team for many years. And then the aiming guy, as you just pointed out, part of his problem is stupid scandal stuff and getting banned for being toxic, etc. Like, these players are all studs, all three of them. Like, they're all LCK level talent. So the cool thing about KT is how they sort of like took like some really weird throwaway pieces, put them together, and have actually made they used to be a sleeper top team. They're just a top team now, Monty. This team could win LCK, right?
Well, absolutely. I mean, I think in this meta, we don't know which patch, obviously, playoffs are going to be on, but basically on the patch 13-11, which are on right now, they do look like the strongest team because it's playing into a lot of their historical wheelhouse champions. This is why we're seeing T1 banning or first picking Azir on blue side, is because you have to keep it away from BDD because he's so phenomenal at this champion. But there's such a deep pool of roaming control mid laners, like map control mid laners, that he can dip into, whether it's the Annie or the Twisted Fate or the Talia. These are all champions that he's extremely good at, and he's propping up the side lanes. And not only that, but honestly, KT probably got a pretty good deal on some of these players in the offseason, because it's not like Keen and BDD had monster years last year. Keen and BDD probably had their worst years last year because they were on shit teams, and I think they weren't very motivated to perform. But now you see that Keen has kind of slowly risen to become the best top laner in the LCK. He's certainly the most well-rounded, right? People will look at Zeus and see him in lane and say, oh yeah, well, Zeus gets these solo kills. But Keen has a huge champion pool, and he can flip-flop from playing, he can play carries in one best of 3 and then flip into playing tanks like he did against T1, where we saw his Gragas and his Malphite. And he is the best and really only good Malphite player within the LCK right now. And he can get flanks. They play with vision very well. They get their pick compositions are really well executed. And aiming is perfectly capable of playing these hyper carries into the late game. So they really just feel like they are built for this meta. And if you had to look at a point of
and they shit on T1 as well, mate. They were just fucking crushing them in this series.
Yeah.
Like this must have been Dom's fucking wet dream series. If he wants T1 stands to suffer, this must have been fucking music to his ears.
Oh yeah, he was hyped about this. The really big question was, and probably the weakest player on this roster so far this year has been Cuz. And Cuz is fucking popping off right now. And none of us really believe that Cuz is going to be able to maintain this level of form. But the question is, does he have to in order for KT to win the split, given that Genji and T1 both also have problems? And if he can continue at this level, and granted, he only has been doing it on a couple of champions, like Sejuani and Viego have been his big picks. He had some kind of weird Volibear picks thrown in there as well. But he continues to get these champions because the priority of banning out other stuff is just so high. Whether that's the Azir, right? Like we discussed, or, they want to take the Sejuani and Vi away if you're not going to first pick those on blue side. That's what T1 was doing in this series. But there are enough other bans that teams have to make that as long as they take a jungler before the second round of bans, Cuz kind of gets what he wants. And he's able to play these things. And, him on Sejuani is just great because it combos with Keen's Jax or Renekton in the top lane so well. You can get Keen ahead. Keen is not a player that throws leads. He didn't even die in the T1 series. Like, you give this guy an edge and he just runs with it. He's not going to make a lot of mistakes that are going to hand you back the game. And I think that's what's so great about watching KT right now is that they do have some, relatively clean execution. They had some hiccups in the early game in game number 2 versus T1, but they managed to turn that around pretty fast, and they made some dumb errors. And I think against a good team, one of the top teams in the LPL like JDG, those would have been unrecoverable. But you can see the resilience because KT came back, and in spite of giving up 2 kills in like the first couple minutes of the game that were really dumb, they won that game in 26 minutes. So they came back really effectively through some fights in the bot lane and around the dragon and showed exactly why this team is, I think, really the best on this patch.
Well, it's like you're saying, if you think about the strength of the players, it's even a team I actually think should be fairly meta-resistant. Like, I absolutely hope this team goes to go to Worlds, Monty. They can mix it up against a lot of different squads. They can even potentially, with those 3 carries, you can switch up which lane you even play through. Like, I'm very interested to see how they coached when they get there. So that's one of the other angles. Because obviously people don't know that's another team coached by I think Rapid Stars in there.
Rapid Star and Supreme, yeah.
A whole bunch of people, yeah. So that's the other cool thing about LCK now. It's like the generation of coaches is the original OGN people from when Monty was caster, basically.
Yeah, it is fun to see that. So I know Rapid Star quite well because his partner used to be one of our English producers at OGN. So she's a good friend of mine. It's been really fun to watch KT, and I think KT fans should be. You guys don't need to be excited. Like we talked about this, it's just the prophecy that they're going to win. We're just watching it play out. There is no excitement because this is just how good they are now, and it's how good they've been this year. They've grown substantially as a roster, and if we see a dramatic meta shift, I think that's what we have questions about coming up is like, okay, so what happens if a bunch of the champions that BDD and Cuz play get nerfed, or we move into a meta where it's like Callista, is aiming going to be good? But aiming has shown a great breadth of champions. We know his Draven is extremely good, so he can play some of these more lane dominant AD carries. So the Kalista really isn't out of the question there, and he's a great Ezreal player, so that's definitely going to be on the table as well. Let me look up his career stats.
I mean, definitely Ezreal is going to be one of his best.
Yeah, Ezreal is probably a signature champion, right? He has a 40% win rate with 20 games on Kalista, so maybe that'll be a question, right? If he gets there. His Kai'Sa also hasn't been super good historically, but I think right now we just have to wait and see if the meta is going to shift, because as long, Azir might get nerfed, for example, and he's going to get nerfed. But are they really going to go after Twisted Fate and Talia? And we know BDD's champion pool is deep from his many years of pro play. And I think they may have to figure out a new style of play, and that's what's going to potentially hurt KT. But in this meta, it looks very, very difficult to take them out.
Especially because they're also one of the teams, as you can imagine, with the player we're talking about in aiming. Like, if you give them the Yuumi as well, then you can have a nice fucking time in that game if it ever gets rolling. Like, that's why I say people just don't understand how good this player is. Like, aiming is, if he was in the LPL, I mean, obviously, I think he actually did play in the LPL briefly. Like, everyone would be screaming about him now. It's just because he had these weird, he got sidetracked because of the drama. Then he was on some bad teams for a while, and also he was being subbed in and out. So it's like, finally, this last year, you got to see what this guy's capable of, and he looks as good as any ADC in the league.
Yeah, I think he's probably not in conversation for number one ADC, but a lot of that is because his team doesn't always rely on him, because they play through Keen a lot of the time, and they are the only, I would say, the only elite team within Korea that is playing around top lane really significantly. And so he does kind of play weak side, but he'll play weak side with a hyper-scaling ADC and still be relevant in the late game, because he's not making mistakes that get him killed in the bottom side of the map frequently. We know also, like, if we return to a Lucian Nami meta, that's kind of where KT really struggled in the spring, because him and Lehens were pretty bad at the Lucian Nami duo. So it's not completely airtight, but also aiming, we'll have to see if he's developed as a player with this new roster, and they're kind of more comfortable having BDD roam down there to support, because they have a mid laner who will go bot constantly in order to prop them up and to facilitate dives and get kills onto the ADC. So he's got a lot of synergy with the rest of his team. But I think what's impressive about KT right now is that they are just controlling vision around objectives and setting up so well, and intercepting people with the Twisted Fate and pick comps before they could even reach objectives. Their macro game has really taken off, and they will just make sure they get the kills before the objectives are even started, and make it as easy as possible to do things like stack the drakes. And that has been, I think, one of their primary advantages so far this year. And they developed this style like halfway through spring, and it led them almost, making it to an upper bracket semifinal in the spring playoffs, right? So I think this is KT's time. If the meta is not going to shift that much, they certainly would be a favorite today if we were talking about who is going to win LCK, because the issue with Gen G is that Doran is making a lot of mistakes in lane, which is leading to deficits. And those deficits, I think, against a player like Keen are going to be deadly in the end.
I'm trying to see, when do they play again? Looks like it's not for a little while. Let's see.
Yeah, I think it's week 7. Yeah, it's they play on July 21st.
Yeah, that's for you. So that's like
22nd.
At the end of the night of the 21st for Monty. It's for 22nd for us. Yeah. Okay, that'll be a banger. But the good thing of that is it's towards the end of the split, so we'll kind of know going into the playoffs who's strong.
Yeah.
I wish I could watch him play today, though. That would be a banger match.
Yeah, I mean, and like the thing is,
KT just might be the best team, like you say. If they beat Gen G, how are they not the best team?
We got robbed of the game in week number 1. First off, it was the pre-Azir buff patch, which is something that's really, really helped KT. Not only because BDD can play it, obviously it's his most played champion of all time, But it's mostly because it has to be banned, and that really warps the draft pretty significantly in favor of KT. So they get some other really big power picks in this meta, like the Annie, for example. And again, we've talked about it before, but KT versus Genji game 2 was the static Shiv incident where Aiming had to go back and sell it after they slammed Genji in game number 1 and then ended up losing that series.
I mean, after that moment, the whole series was a blue balls. You can never get that one back. Yeah. That was like the old classic Jaedong versus Flash one where the fucking lights just went out in the arena. It's like you can never rewind that now. Now it's just ruined the whole thing in it. You know?
Yeah. You know, the hour pause while Hirai like argued with the referees and then got banned for 2 weeks. So the whole thing was just basically a shit show, guys, and we can't read too much into that. Plus, it wasn't on the patch that I think really enabled KT. We'll see what patch they end up playing on. They are on patch 13.12 this week. That started last night. So, and the notes for 13.13 just got released, and we will see if we are on. We probably will be on 13.13 by the time that match rolls around.
Yes. Also, one last thing. Keen also is definitely on that list of players where they're like best player never to win LCK, best player never to win Worlds. He'd be on that list. He's definitely like a guy with an underrated body of work.
Yeah, for sure. And for 13.13, the notes came out and they did this is the patch where they did nerf like Annie, Aphelios, Vi. So these are all top Neeko, these are all top tier picks in pro play. And if these picks are no longer as good, one of the things that might occur is that you get more bans to prioritize against KT's, major threats in terms of carries. This means that it's easier to ban out, both the Viego and the Sejuani potentially. It's easier to ban out the Azir and not give up the Annie in response. So we'll have to see how this plays out with KT, but it does lead to, I think, potentially more effective banning strategies against them.
I just hope it means now fucking Western players will stop picking Neeko. You're all fucking shit at it. Stop doing that. It's mercy, William, mercy. Just stop fucking picking it. You're not good. Just pick some normal shit, you idiot. There's loads of OP shit in middle lane.
Well, I think the Neeko picks, if you've watched, like, there's been a bazillion Neeko games within the LPL, but you get to see how strong this champion can be in terms of deception by watching a lot of these Chinese or Korean players play it, because they're constantly just transforming into their allies, setting up these pick plays, making sure that they keep their allies off the screen, so it really looks like it's a Leona going in and not a Neeko, and by the time she pops her ult, it's way too late. So it's been really fun, and I'm split on how I feel about Neeko, because sometimes I feel that it's too strong to be able to deceive people in this way. But at the same time, it is fun to see the mind games play out on the professional level and have players constantly having to second guess about where the Neeko is and if the engage is coming in.
Yeah, but here's the problem I have, Monty. You're talking about the best League of Legends again. Yeah, it's mega when they play it in the LPL, and the way they'll even like pick which ally, which would be an interesting one to be coming at you, and then they trick you, and then suddenly it's like a flank over here, they're coming in. That's all great. My problem is this. This is another one of those areas where I need to revisit that whole thing where, people go like, Koreans aren't just born better. It's like, first of all, I'm not taking that off the table anymore. That's on the table when we're doing the considerations about why Korea is so much better than the West. Like, yeah, I'd like to believe it's just cultural. Mate, I'm getting sick of this. How many fucking things over a 10-year time span, Monty, are we going to watch Westerners just incapable of doing, no matter how little it actually requires to do it? Like, you remember way back in 2014 when the Koreans figured out how you could aggro the dragon so no one ever took any damage. You could just kill the dragon in like a few minutes. Then I saw even the best Western teams like Cloud9 doing it, and they weren't getting it doing right. Like, they were taking aggro and people were getting hit and it was getting reset. And it's like, bro, that's just hitting a dragon with 3 people on your own, no interactions from anything else. Then you have, how about when you had all the shit where it's like no one could do the fucking TP flank properly in season 4, in season 5, in season 6. They never figured out how to do the fucking TP flank in the West. They never ever figured it out. The joke is, Peter Dunn gets to look like he came out of a fucking DeLorean with a grey sports almanac because he can just do double TPs. That makes him look like a genius in the West. He's blowing our minds right now. What is this strange magic he brings to our town? time. Like, it's fucking crazy, mate. Like, the amount of things. Then, how about this angle? How about a million Jackson Fiora top lane games that I've watched carry the fuck out of LPL and LCK? Then I go watch it in LCS and LEC, absolutely diddling squat, can't even carry a game. Then you go off all the other fucking champions, mate. It's ridiculous. Like, the Nidalee jungle, like, how many Rengar jungle, how many fucking just champions cannot be played in the West, like in the East? Like, at this point in time, Monty, people have got to just fucking give it up to the elite Asians. They're just so much better at the game.
I mean,
that isn't to do with the solo queue. That has nothing to do with what you do. You're just fundamentally worse players. Like, you can't do concepts like I said, like juggle a fucking dragon. Never mind the idea of playing 17 hours a day and it's accepted in Korea. Like, fucking, no, it isn't. What are you talking about?
Well, I think this is one of Dom's like pet peeves right now that we've discussed on some of the other shows with Western players playing Annie, is that because you can't set up vision properly as a Western team, you can't get the flanks you need in order to make the proper engages. And you see that difference when it comes to being able to execute pincer maneuvers or being able to threaten the back line by being on a flank without getting yourself killed. And a lot of the Western teams are just running at each other. But the problem, Thorin, is like you can only play up to your competition. If you are getting by and you're winning all your games by not doing these things, are you ever going to do the things that you need because you're not being challenged in that way? If no one's punishing you for making these mistakes, no one is ever going to learn, right? It's the product of being in a less competitive environment. And the only way to fix that is, in fact, to have these players go and compete in better regions, right? Because that is the way that they are going to improve, because it's going to force them to improve in ways that they would not be forced to as long as they're competing within North America or Europe.
I would agree with you in the general sense. Like, if you ask me what are Westerners, particularly gamers who are young men who are Westerners, going to be like, yeah, they're not going to push themselves, Monty. They're going to go right up to the level of what they're required to do. If they can be the best, they're not going to care that ultimately they're not actually that good. They're just better. Yeah, I agree. The problem I have is if I take it outside of the like royal you, where you're talking generally about everyone, I could answer all your questions there and you'd be wrong on every single one. Like, by the way, if I only played up to the level of my competition, Monty, do you know how far behind esports journalism would be? Like, if I was just doing what I needed to do in 2004 and 2008 and 2012, it'd be nowhere. Like, I don't need to do the shit I do now, mate. Like, I push myself because I want to see how good I can be. Because I know that even though what I've done is this good, there's so much more possible. Like, so to me, I actually do think that is one thing that is whack, is this notion, the G2 example is the best one ever, that every split you win all the scrims and you go, lol. It's like, no, there's no lol. That makes you more pathetic that you're so bad internationally. Here's what I would be doing. If I'm winning scrims that hard, I'm not just only scrimming shit like I normally do in our current meta. I'm going to start setting them challenges like I would set a chess player that I wanted to improve. Things like, let's try like late game scenarios. Let's actually try letting one lane get ahead. And how do we fight back in? What are the correct things we trade? When do we manipulate waves? When do we gamble on a bar? I'd be doing this shit. I would be trying to push the boundaries and the horizons. This is why, in my opinion, the worst part that no one ever talks about the ecosystem in League of Legends, it's not just the league format, which I think sucks, because essentially, if you don't peak for the right couple of weeks in the whole year, your whole year is fucked. Like, you can't do anything. You can't go to Worlds if you're bad for like 3 or 4 weeks out of the whole year. Like, if you get the wrong one, you just don't do it. And then the other thing for me is the coaching angle, Monty. The coaching incentives are so stupid in this game because they play into what you're talking about. Everyone's job who's an LEC or LCS coach is win these 2 games or 3 games this week, depending on what year we're talking about. That's it. It's not about be excellent. It's not about, no, it's if I'm playing Immortals and Dig this week, just beat Immortals and Dig. That's all that matters. Kept my job for another week. That's fucking whack. We want to dare people to be great, Monty. I want someone to come in like Reaper did in Cloud9 and go, you know what, give me this project. Give me the project. Give me control over the fucking roster, who I can sub in and out, what drafts. I can even overrule a player. Mate, that's fucking sick. Look, he might not have won all the championships, but it was this fucking mega compelling time. There's a reason his team went further at Worlds than any other teams, etc. Like, to me, these are the things you want to do. So when you're talking about the bona fide people, I'm talking about Peter Dunn and Mac and fucking back in the day you'd have picked Youngbuck and Dylan Falco. These guys, they should actually be, in my opinion, the equivalent of what a GM is in sports in terms of how long you invest in them. Like, you know this, Monty. You don't in an NFL team get a GM and fire him next year. You give him like 10 years. You go, look, I'm buying because I think you're the best, or you came up through my org and you know the company, and I'm going to give you a solid 10 years. So by the way, it's the reason why, spoiler, I'll just give you a little hint here. I don't think the real reason those mega old texts from fucking John Gruden came out is because someone just found them now, Monty. That was some fucking dead man's drive shit where someone inside the Raiders was like, oh, he's sort of fucked up the first few years. I don't want 7 more years of this. Release the documents. And then they just fucking they politically maneuvered him out of office, as it were, because that is supposed to be the point in sports. You invest in like a long-term vision. So I would love it if you had a setup like this. Like, if people don't know, by the way, the Peter Dunn one is probably the most criminal one. If people don't know, Peter Dunn is on some like Greg Popovich type shit, where even his coaching staffs are all goated. He had Mac under him and fucking Duke, the French guy. He had all these fucking people under him, the Empire guy at Evil Geniuses. Like, the point is, that's the other thing you'd get if you had years and years of someone being in charge of a project. They'd also have whole coaching staffs, and they'd have people they groomed in that way to be the next replacement for me on the draft, and then this one over here so I can focus on bigger picture thing. Without making it too extended a thing, I actually do think that Western mentality is whack. I think it fucking sucks, dude. I want people to try and be the greatest ever.
I think the problem, Thorin, is that you have to have 5 of those people on the same roster.
Sure.
Right? Like, you have to have 5 incredibly hungry players. And the issue is that is that a lot of times you want to keep like a legacy pro player, but they might not have that same hunger anymore. If they like, here's a question. I don't know the answer to this. This is purely a hypothetical, but is Caps the guy who really gives the most fucks about winning anymore after he has won an MSI and he's had such immense success? Or was that because Caps was super hungry with the rest of those players on G2 back in the day, and they managed to assemble this roster of players who were all highly motivated to kind of reach that next level of play? It's a real question. I'm not accusing Caps of being unmotivated, but I do think it might be hard to believe that he is the most hungry given the success that he's had in his career, and is like arguably the greatest Western player of all time at this stage, given what's happened with Perks over the last couple of years. He certainly leveled up in terms of that conversation with additional titles and additional success, right? So it's really tough, I think, to have 5 of those guys on one roster. You know, you normally have 1 or 2 of those guys, and those become standout players. But in a team sport, that's just not sufficient in order to get there. And I think that because there is oftentimes massive churn amongst the Chinese and Korean teams, and you always have them kind of bringing up these rookies. I mean, look what happened with T1 and their recent success. People will joke that they lose the finals, but I mean, they've made every final over the last couple of years. And a lot of that has been riding on Faker's insane, kind of unprecedented in esports longevity, combined with a lot of younger players. So I think it's hard. I agree with your premise. I just think it's hard to get 5 players who are all going to be simultaneously at the same point in their career where they have the hunger to do that grind.
That's why, though, that G2 team was the legendary one, because that was players who've already been the best at their role in their region. Like, a bunch of them have even won championships. So at that point, like, that you have unlocked the next level, which is like, now let's actually play the Koreans and the Chinese like we're as good and potentially win the shit. That's why, in some ways, by the way, one thing I'll never do is, so I'm obviously a big stan, well, I was until recently, of the fucking Vitality super team attempt. I like super teams like that, Monty, because if they ever work, you can do this. You can go for the absolute top. It's why I don't think you should get a break and be like, well, you know, they're all right. It's like, nah, it's win or bust if you're that level of talent. And if you have those players, you absolutely should be like a lock to be in the finals, to be at Worlds, do all these things. So to me, it's why I agree with you. The problem is normal players, to get back to the original point, just aren't as good. So realistically, they're not going to practice the same way. They're not going to have the same ambitions. But that's why if you ever get the ones who've already like sort of had the amazing individual career, the stud ADC in mid lane, you do want to see those players. Like, the problem at the moment is there isn't really a team like that now. Like, maybe G2's sort of like that, but then they've got Yike, who's a rookie still, and then no one still knows. Like, that spoiler, I'm just going to say this now since y'all fucking overrate the fuck out of this guy in his whole career. I must have missed all those fucking insane fucking international like series that fucking, what's his name, Hans Sammer's played. Hasn't he played one against T1 that he lost? Isn't that it? Y'all are talking like fucking, this guy's a wizard or something. Like, what? Like, give me a break. So the problem is, I do want to see another team like that one day. It's not going to be Vitality, sadly.
I mean, before the Team Liquid disaster, I would argue that Hans Sammer was the best performing player on Rogue at Worlds. when they went.
Yeah, because the problem with that sentence is it got about 1,000 times less sexy when you said on Rogue and then said it World. So, up until that, I was like, bloody hell, yeah.
But I think that was one of the reasons why
You have
Team
to
Liquid was
understand, they're
running
one of the most in shape people under the age of 60 that work in the DMV. You're like, well, yeah, I mean, fucking again, like started so well at the end. What was it? What did it mean at the end?
What's interesting though is that it appears that Riot is moving towards a 3-split system across all regions for next year. I previously said that they are going to do this in the LCS. It looks like some form of this is going to appear both within the LPL and LCK because they want to add another international event, by the way. So this is, by the way, I don't understand Riot. Why am I taking a time machine back to 2014 when we had good formats in 2024? They spent a decade destroying good formats that were grown organically within Korea. Because remember, there were 3 tournaments a year called Champions in Korea, right? And we had more international events like IEM, Katowice, or famously that was the big one that most of the international teams went to in the early few years of LCS and LEC. They would take a break for a week, those leagues, and they would send teams to IEM in order to compete. And Korea would do the exact same thing. There were Korean teams there. There were Chinese teams there. We had this system. Why did we go away from it only to go back to it now? How is it possible that this is basically an admission that the design of the international league system and the fucking terrible league play was wrong? If everybody goes over to the LEC format, which is 3 tournaments a year, basically, we could have had this the entire time. It was working at the time before those morons at Riot decided to inflict these sports league mentalities onto the world, right?
Basically, here's what I think happened. I think that, as you're saying, they used to have wolves, but eventually Riot came along and they turned them all into chihuahuas, right? But then what happened is, over in a different paddock, we'll call this like VALORANT world. Over in VALORANT world, they also already had chihuahuas, but they bred them to be more and more aggressive and with better genes until eventually you got a pit bull. And now Riot has just discovered that you can have pit bulls as well as chihuahuas, and pit bulls actually a lot more aggressive, a lot more exciting to watch fight. So if you don't know, in Valorant, they figured out that international tournaments are sort of this shit, and basically the only reason you watch is, like, if you don't get it, guys, the region was supposed to be a qualifier to the international tournament. That's why it's so hilarious that the dumbest thing about the era of all the league circuits after season 2 is you have players who, because there was like 2 or 3 slots for Worlds, played their whole careers and barely ever went international. It's like they had to have their whole career in the qualifier, essentially. Like, that's just whack. So no, that's why I think it is money for real. I think what's happened is they're so dumb that, because in Valorant it isn't leagues, they're allowed to try other stuff. They've found that things like double elim's good and international. It's like they are just rediscovering things that we all knew ages ago that they buried in a junkyard somewhere. But now they get to be like, look, because I'll bet they're such cocksuckers as well, Monty. You just know that they're just going like, but look at the ES charts, sir, and like pulling up graphs and shit, fucking got binders with all color coded. Oh, it's so ridiculous. Meanwhile, back in the day, you remember how it was. You just had to essentially go, that's a great idea, sir. The NFL does it that way. And then the guy's like, ooh, really?
But here's the thing, guys.
For you.
The reason why you would want potentially leagues for franchise teams is because it gives all of the teams more even playing time so that they can sell sponsors, right? It's less exciting for fans because teams don't get eliminated who suck. You just have to watch a million games of teams that suck. But at least if you pay money to own a franchise team, that means that at least you have a baseline of viewership in order to get revenue from sponsorship. But what you have to remember is that franchising didn't happen until 2017. These formats were implemented until 2018, right? Yes. These formats were implemented in first off, the league formats were implemented in LCS and LEC basically immediately. And then it was forced on Korea in 2015 away from the 3 tournament system. and they didn't actually franchise until years later. So they were using a system that made no sense from a financial perspective for the teams and was bad for viewership. And now they're trying to roll back all of this shit, give less guaranteed view time to their franchise team. And what's so offensive about this is, like, I don't understand how the Riot Esports department, if I'm John Needham, who's in charge of Riot Esports, and I see that these new formats are generating significant interest, I would be on the warpath internally to figure out, because he wasn't there at the time these decisions were made, who was making these decisions and holding them accountable. Like, you got to get rid of these people who made these decisions because they were just objectively wrong. They were just objectively wrong decisions that were made at the time.
I mean, I don't know if you're familiar with the game, company Riot Games, but even when they do things that are objectively wrong at the time, you don't always get fired at that company. Don't know if you've been keeping track of the sort of ins and outs of the company, you know. You only get fired if you're some sort of world-class broadcast talent and you just want a long career and to work for the company and do great work. If you do that, your time's numbered, mate. And watch out, the fucking sword of Damocles is above you all day long. By the way, I have a topic we could bring up here because it ties into the fact that, like, it's not just LCS, guys. This example will show that LEC in some ways is just as bad. Right? You know, one thing I despise is when pro players, especially in games that are a proxy for fucking war, just basically are the biggest pussies of all time. And they want it on easy mode and they want to play shit formats. And so, like, for example, obviously we flamed the fuck out of the fact that they're all getting paid. Monty's not doing cocaine right now, by the way. He's just looking for something.
I'm not doing cocaine.
I'm talking to like you do a line or something.
Sorry, my son has made it into my office, so I'm trying to get rid of him right now. Sorry.
Basically, in the same way as, like, in 2020, they wanted to cancel the spring split of LCS because they were like, oh, well, why should we play from home anyway? But we can keep our salaries out. We do get to keep the salaries. And then now, obviously, there was the whole thing where Doublelift and them were like, what? We're not getting paid, right? Forget about the principle. Back to work, lads. Follow me. Hi ho, hi ho. Like, it's fucking ridiculous. But it's just as bad in LEC. Dom told me the other day, Monty. Are you ready? I love the new LEC format. It's a banger.
Yeah,
you get rid of two of the shittest teams. All the good teams make it to the groups. In the groups, you get proper best of three play. You've got that little mixed up element. Then you have the real playoffs, best of fives, double limb. Apparently, loads of pros in LEC don't like the format because two of the teams get eliminated after 3 weeks. Monty, what sort of fucking losers are these players? If you can't win like 3 games out of 9 over a 3-week span, get the fuck out of the league. I don't care who you are, by the way. Even if it's Vitality now, get the fuck out of the league. I don't want to see you on week 4. You have already wasted 3 weeks of my time. Get out, because that's the problem. The best part about that is this format's like how we wanted to design it. All it does is eliminate. Yeah, you could maybe get super unlucky with the group draw. But by the way, even the group draw, if you were going to win the tournament, you're probably going to be fine there anyway.
Yes.
So to me, the idea that anyone except someone on like XL is going like, this format sucks. Like, what are you talking about, you idiot? None of you are in trouble. Like, even people on teams like Astralis are going to get through the fucking group stage. So I can't believe pros would actually complain about this. Like, are you out of your minds, guys? This is a great format, in my opinion.
It's a great format. And also, the thing is, yeah, if you have to play, we've talked about the problems with best of 1. We've talked about the problems with 3 different opponents within the same week.
Yep.
But if you are incapable of getting top 8, if you're incapable of being in the top 80% of the teams in the league in this format, you deserve to go away. Right. Yeah. I think that's what's so great about the format is we're not talking about, the top 4 teams and there might be some weird outliers in there. It's literally it's 80% of the league gets through to the next stage. So I think there's no issues. The format is great. I mean, the funny thing that might happen, Thorin, at least in the LEC, is that there's a non-zero chance that like Vitality ends up getting eliminated or they squeak through and get eliminated early, but then they're in the season finals because they have so many championship points. So Vitality might literally be there just like twiddling their thumbs, waiting for the entire summer season to go by, only to have to continue playing in the season finals, which obviously I think they would be extremely unmotivated to play given what we've seen from their current form, because they look like a team that hates each other and never wants to play together again at this point in time. So for my own amusement, it would be funny to see them just waiting 2 months basically in order to participate in the season playoffs that LEC is having after getting eliminated so early on in summer.
Here's the joke for you, okay, because I've thought it up. I've been thinking a lot about Vitality and what the problems in the team are, what synergies do or don't exist, how they can have, in theory, look, Kaiser's not very good, but the other four on paper are good players, upper half of the LEC. Some of them even not that long ago in past splits were candidates for best player at their position. But I've realised why they fucked the team, Monty. Because obviously this team is all about perks, right? You've got the himself candidate for GOAT Western player, right? What are Perks' two biggest strengths? One is that he's a really good shot caller, Monty. He can call the decisive play. And then two, he's one of the best leaders outside of the game as well, keeping people accountable, knowing when to use levity, when to use a bit of the old carrot and the stick, you know, depending on which is which. Well, if you think about the team they've made, the top side of the map is a Korean guy trying to speak English to a Chinese guy who's trying to speak English to a Korean guy. So already communications, that's you've chopped it in half. Half as useful for communication. So that's one of Perks' strengths gone. But it's okay, though, because he can always turn to his team when they're losing, Monty, and rouse their spirits with some humour. Oh, that's right. The bot lane's German. I think you've actually, in some ways, neutralized all of his strengths. I don't know how you did it, but like, this is incredible. Whoever built this Vitality team, you actually don't think anything exists except just move. You're actually LS's dream. You're just piloting champions. That's all you're doing. You're not even doing any other component. It's amazing.
I think what they're actually doing is that they are just embodying the French sense of nihilism, where this is what French people deeply crave, which is just to watch with, you know, a total lack of hope, this team take another L, looking lifeless and listless while doing it, and then smoke a cigarette, drink some coffee, and ruminate on the meaninglessness of life. So I think
sure whenever he finishes a game, Upset does just think hell is other people. Why aren't I playing a 1v1 game? Probably contacts Gumiushi. What's that like game your brother used to play, that 1v1 game? Sounds really good. Like, I have good mechanics and let me get in on that. Let me get on some StarCraft 2. Let's go.
They're just having the Camus Sisyphean experience right now. There is nothing left for Vitality but to just push the boulder uphill, wait till it gets slightly to the top, and then have it fall down disappointingly again.
Here's the thing, though. I might have finally stopped picking them to win splits, but we'll see. Though the problem is,
did you again?
Of course, I did number one in my power rankings.
God damn it!
Because here's the problem. I still look at it's like the FlyQuest roster. I still look at it on paper like this should be so much better. Surely something is happening off camera when I'm not seeing them, and they're trying to improve. And you know this story, Monty. Just like FlyQuest, the story was they're good in scrims and that they're actually fixing it. It's all going to be great. Don't worry about it. Like, so when you have that information, you keep thinking, oh, come on, it's going to kick into gear eventually. The reason I say might is because here's the problem, Monty. Yeah, in theory, I look at this lineup, I'm like, I'm out on so many factors. It hasn't really worked, you know. They never really had the true synergy. They never had one team that was all on paper looking good. But then again, all they'd need to do was some ridiculous shit in the off season. Like they just swap Kaiser for some other support. And then I'd be, ooh, for me. And then I might just fucking pick him again, mate, because I don't care. For a start off, I still think Upset could be the best. Just this team fucking just sucks at the moment. So what do you want?
I mean, they just look like they are mentally shattered, which is weird. I mean, you know, have Scrimbucks ever been bigger liars than they are this split? Because FlyQuest and Vitality have all the fucking Scrimbucks, and yet they can't win to save their lives. It's just one win between the pair of them.
I even think the Vitality one is the craziest, because here's the other thing to me. In most of their games, basically every game except the Fnatic one, they're in these games. Sometimes they're winning them. Sometimes they're in good positions. But I'll tell you what happens. This is something I learned recently from Counter-Strike, believe it or not. So in Counter-Strike, there was the in-game leader called Karrigan, who used to be in charge of the Astralis players before they swapped him out for Glaive, right? And at the time, they famously were known as the team, and he was the in-game leader who choked. Like, he's the one who, when he had FaZe, they were in the Boston Major final, and they should have won easily over Cloud9, but they choked it away and they lost. Right? When you're the choker, here's what I've learned happens. You can actually flip 180 and become the super clutch guy. It happened to the Astralis players and it happened to Karrigan. And what it is, in my opinion, is it's just an example of the self-fulfilling prophecy. So what happens is when you choke every time, You start thinking about it when you're in that scenario next, like, oh, fuck, this is when it happens again. Like, you start lose the game. Oh, is it going to happen again? But if you win every time, if you're the clutch guy who always comes through, like Carrigan's FaZe Clan did for the last year or so, it becomes the opposite. Now, even in that scenario where it's like you're back against the wall, you start thinking like, you know what? I've found my way out of this before, though. Like, fuck it, I'll go for a play. Like, it could work. Like, I can still do it. And the real problem is this, Monty. The opposition start to get both those tendencies too. So when you choke every time, like the Vitality team does, dude, I'll guarantee every team playing them in these official AC games is like, just hang around in the game, mate. Like, it ain't over. Doesn't matter that they're just going to kill us. Doesn't matter they just got our buffs. Doesn't matter that they took the dragon. Keep hanging the game and they're going to give us a way back. In the same way as I'd say on the opposite side, people actually think the opposite about people like G2. So if you're against G2, they'll probably find a way back in this game. They're probably going to win the next hit. You know what I mean? Like, that is a bit, I think people underestimate psychological components like that.
Yeah, I think the expectations of what could happen like can keep the opponent team in the game and potentially pull out wins if you're not mentally defeated because you know they're going to bop you immediately, right? I think that's definitely true. We've talked about the nameplate difference. Players play differently around Faker than they do historically in most other matchups. A lot of times they would play scared, and I think that's part of Faker's success is the aura that he exudes on the map and the way that he makes people do things or play in ways that they normally wouldn't.
Oh, we've already mentioned, like, Faker's the obvious one, but the worst example of that ever to me is Bjergsen those last, like, 5 or 6 years. Because eventually, it's like people were just just to give him, like, a present in the playoffs or whatever. Like, what? Like, some of those were outrageous to me. He wasn't even the best player anymore. And people were just like, oh, my God, it's Bjergsen. What can I do? And so he's like John Wick or something.
They're like, it's Bjergsen Zilean. Should I play Lucian? I should not play Lucian. I'll just slowly lose this game while doing nothing. Those are the best times.
That's why low key, the one moment I actually started to sort of hate on Jensen was when Jensen was like big brain, like maybe I pick the Zilean. It's like, no one should be picking the Zilean. You're supposed to fucking defeat him, not become him, you idiot. Why are you picking fucking Zilean? There's not even a real champion at the pro level. Why are we playing this shit in playoff games to win playoff games, for fuck's sake? That's another moment I knew NA was just done when Zilean just rules the day, like in like season fucking 10 or something. What are you talking about?
That was the first sign of the LCS's fall. I mean, literally, like, who wants to watch this garbage? Like, who on earth is like, yes, I wish there was more Zilean within professional League of Legends. This is truly the pinnacle of champion design. I must see the best players in the world play fucking Zilean. If we get to that point, guys, the entire game is over. The entire game is over. And I think that was a precursor to the start of the decline in LCS viewership, which has been quite spectacular this season. Quite spectacular indeed. It's actually crazy. You know, Thorin, our shows are now getting more views than peak concurrence on the LCS.
I mean, we actually are entertaining those sometimes. So to be fair, I'd say that seems totally reasonable to me. The expectation seems entirely with what I would expect. Nothing ironic about that at all. Here's the one thing I do have to say though, is when everyone was making all those boneheaded comments about their salaries, Monty, like, you should just pay them less. Oh, don't worry, they will be paying them a lot less now. Don't worry about that. What will happen is in the next 1 or 2 years, if you think now is the esports winter, you want to see what happens to those ad budgets from sponsors for the fucking LCS teams the next couple of years, boys. Like, the joke is, if you only like League of Legends, you better hope games like Valorant and CS2 pop the fuck off. Because I don't know how your orgs are going to get that money. Like, remember, the thing about the LCS orgs, so the American orgs, is they have ruled the day from having that enormous American ad market for so many years with only like 1 or 2 recessions along the way, which very quickly get bounced back from. If the whole space like it is now tanks and people just won't spend as much and certain budgets just go away forever, they're not even like renegotiating down money, they just go away forever. Like, see, yeah, we're exiting the game. In that world, like, everyone is getting paid way less. Like, one thing I've always told people I think is so misunderstood in esports is nobody in esports actually like earned the salary they make, as in the work you did isn't in some absolute sense worth this much money. Because you know this, Monty, the amounts we used to make in like 2013, we could be 10 times better than we are now. It's impossible to make half what we make now. Meanwhile, if you come to now, you could be a tenth as good as you were 10 years ago and make twice as much money. Like, that's because the money scales relative to the industry and the variables inputting into the ecosystem. So I always say this to pro players. One of the reasons I look down so much on some of the complaining winning in CSGO, Monty, is because if you were the best player in the entire world who won every tournament in 2010, you might make, all things combined, $30,000 that year. You can make $30,000 for 1 month on fucking Evil Geniuses and come last place in every tournament. That's CSGO now. So if you're now complaining about minor things, it's like, give me a break, guys. You don't know what an insanely privileged space we're actually in right now. And so I don't take it for granted, mate. I've seen the hard times and when people have to tighten their belts. So I'm actually, people laughing at the quality of play. I'm really worried just about LCS surviving in general. Like, especially actually, by the way, as games like Valorant pop off, like if I'm some of these orgs, I'm just not going to be putting my same focus on it, mate. I'm just going to be gradually peeling back or exiting completely.
Yeah, and especially because it was just announced that in July, Valorant is going to be released in China, which has been something that has been on the back burner for years now, since the game is released, because it takes a notoriously long time. I now have a cat on my desk. It's not a banner day for distractions here. It has taken a notoriously long time for games to get approved for, release to the Chinese audience. So yeah, I think
I always forget that because obviously the government has to say that you can actually let it enter the space.
It's been a long time coming. And the Chinese government for years actually said that no new games were going to be approved. So it was kind of in this endless queue, waiting to see if the Chinese government was actually going to let it out. And that news just was released that come July, that's going to happen. So Valorant is heading towards being a global title. And given the adoption rate of League of Legends in China, there are, allegedly 75 million Chinese players. Riot, a lot of them are probably going to want to try at least another Riot title. So could be interesting to see.
By the way, that's very interesting because actually there's a team that was actually at this last Valorant Masters in Tokyo, EDG, which not only looks mega mechanically, Monty, but they're star player. This Can guy looked like the best fucking player of the tournament. He was unbelievable. So if they actually do widespread release that game in China and people start playing it, I've always told the Westerners, because CS has just never been an Asian game, you don't even know, for all we know, the actual best players aren't even from our region, you idiots. There probably is some Korean guy who would have been cracked as fuck at CSGO, but we just never got to see it, unfortunately. He was off to playing StarCraft or League of Legends. By the way, as a joke, because this is true, if people don't know, what's hilarious is around the time Valorant's coming out, if you don't know, Overwatch is already fucked in China because the distributor, which Blizzard is so corrupt, they gave a fucking actual slot to in their league to the distributor of the region, NetEase. They had some battle with Blizzard, where they're suing them or some shit. That was the thing where it was about Bobby Kotick being an arsehole over it. That's how mad esports is. As one game enters, one exits. What the fuck's this? A life, an old man dies, a child is born. It's some sort of fucking circle of life shit.
Yeah, it's crazy too because Chengdu, the Chengdu Hunters recently announced that they were going to be stopping running their Overwatch League franchise, which they bought. So yeah, it's been an interesting time for Overwatch, but yeah, you can't even play Overwatch or any Blizzard titles in China anymore because they fucked up the deal with the distributor. I mean, it's a complete mess, but it just goes to show that you really do have to play ball with China, and obviously Riot has pretty big advantages because they're owned by Tencent, so it's a lot easier for them to play ball than developers that are owned by Westerners.
Well, by the way, though, I'll never stop laughing though at the fucking the biggest clown world move ever in Overwatch League has to be that you did the whole thing about franchising being geolocated, and it was all teams trying to flex we get that New York attitude, big state, Empire State of Mind, baby. And then the Philly one, this is the best one. The Philly one, to downsize and cut costs, just became a team in Seoul, Korea.
Yes.
Now, the reason that's amazing is because think of the sports culture of Philly. Hey, bro, we're just from Philly. We give you a hard time, but we do that to everyone, man. Oh, Seoul Infernal. I'm a huge fan. It's so because if you don't know Philly fans, they will hate on you, but they're pretty loyal. They'll still watch the Flyers and the fucking Sixers. So the idea that you just took their whole franchise and give it some Korean brilliant. Like, and what I just loved about that whole topic was we didn't do anything with this, but I should have done something. I should have just done a whole skit, Monty, where I'm like a Fox News, like Bill O'Reilly type character. And when they started the downsizing, I should have done a whole thing about how they were sending like American jobs over to China or some shit. Like there was so much material we could have worked in there. By the way, as a random aside, if you never saw this, because you don't need to know that much about CS, go look up the Flashpoint skit we did, where we had Freya, the female host who does all the amazing CSGO events, but this was earlier in her career. And she is such a fucking gamer in the sense of like willing to do like the fucking hard yards. She did this skit where I get her to just be like a traditional news presenter, but she's reading all headlines I've written and they are wild as fuck. Like, just go watch it. They're with all the like companies she has to work with after that, but they're so outrageous, the lines you put in there. It was really good though, because it looks like an actual like, Channel 4 News or whatever. Yeah,
she has that like news anchor energy too, and like
it.
the news anchor looks. It was really good. Yeah. It was really good. But back to your point about the LCS, like I just don't understand how you get out of the death spiral right now, because just some of the points you brought up, it really is. It was propped up by all of these American advertisers, and they came in when the LCS was doing super well. And even in the boom years of the LCS, they weren't getting good value out of those sponsorships. And now that the viewership has declined so drastically, and they're lucky at this point to peak at over 100,000 concurrent viewers across all streams, Twitch, YouTube, co-streamers combined. How do you get these advertisers back? They've already pulled out, right? Who are you going to get that's going to be willing to overpay for this when, you were treating your sponsor so cavalierly? You thought it was good enough to receive millions of dollars to slap State Farm's logo on a desk and call it the State Farm analyst desk, and that was it. That's what you did for them. You didn't really do anything else. You didn't provide any additional value. I compare this to what the LEC has done. At least the LEC has had some fun commercials that they've done for like Kia, and they have more creative ideas about like the Kit Kat break. I think sponsoring the downtime is actually fucking brilliant and hilarious. So the LEC, I think, has done a lot better job of working with their sponsors to make them compelling to fans than the LCS has. And so where do you go? Like, who's going to be willing to invest in this thing? You now have teams that are Madison Square Garden is paying NRG to take the team away from them, right? How do you deal with this? I think it is an impossible situation, and that's why you're not going to see another commissioner of the LCS, because the job is a poison chalice, and they're not going to appoint anybody internally because nobody wants it, and they want to hide the ball of the failure of this league. So nobody's going to take responsibility for it. There's going to be nobody for either the teams who are their partners to hold accountable, because what they're going to do is Riot's just going to switch the person talking to the teams constantly behind the scenes so that there's never any traction that you can get in these conversations. The whole thing is just doomed. I mean, it is just doomed at this point in time.
Here's what my suggestion would be. Obviously, this will never happen, because if you know Riot, they already, if you take over, like, right, well, obviously we painted you into this corner, so you can't change any of those variables. And now, within our fucked up limited framework, find a way to succeed. We couldn't. Like, if I'm allowed to change some factors, here's what I would do tomorrow, Monty. I would just make a rule. Are you ready? Anyone who wants to can co-stream. You just have to use our sponsor assets, essentially. You have to just show the asset. You have to let the commercial roll, whatever it might be. But the reason I would do that is this, Monty. Spoiler, if that was the case, me and Monty will do a fucking desk for the marquee game of the week ourselves. Like, you know what I mean? Yeah. There'll be so many creative solutions, because the dumbest thing in esports to me always is this, Monty. The one thing esports is still overflowing with is brilliant individuals who have their own ideas, their own skill sets, and who are hardworking. But you got to enable them. You got to incentivize them. So at the moment, we don't do that. We say you have to leap through 500
I would co-stream if I could.
Of course.
But here's the thing. I'm not going to co-stream according to Riot's rules. I'm not going to be a Riot patsy. Here, I mean, I'll do everything that a co-streamer is required. And I'll do this because I've been on thousands and thousands of hours of official Riot broadcasts. Have I ever, at Worlds, at an international event, at OGN, casting Korean League of Legends, have I ever bagged on Riot on an official broadcast? The answer is no, I haven't. Right? I'm a professional. And so if I was co-streaming, I wouldn't fucking do that on my co-streams. But I am not going to allow Riot to police my content that happens on my own channels outside of those broadcasts. And you know what? I will be fucking critical, just as I always have been on this show, on other shows that I do. because that's the kind of life I want to live, and I want to be able to have honest conversations because that's my number one priority. So if Riot can get over that, I will co-stream. I would. I think it's fun and it would be good for me to do these things, but there's no point in doing it otherwise because and like you said, maybe they would find some, diamonds in the rough there of new people who are coming up, who might generate viewership. They might find that major influencers would be interested in co-streaming. Not that those people couldn't get co-streaming rights right now. I'm sure Riot would fall over themselves to get some major streamers. But the point is, a lot of major streamers aren't going to go through the channels in order to get that approved. One day, if they just want to like pop on and co-stream for a bit, and if their audience starts to like it, maybe they'll continue to do it and do it more. But they're not going to do that if they have to jump through a million hoops in order to accomplish these goals.
Indeed.
So I do think like outside of some, changes taking place, the whole LCS project is going to be really doomed. And considering that nobody seems to want to take responsibility to revitalize this league or have any kind of long-term vision for it, I think it's pretty much over. We'll see if they get somebody.
I'll give you another idea. It's just another freebie because spoiler, I'm not going to do a Flashpoint thing again. Fuck that noise. So I'll just give these ideas away for free like I used to back in the day. So here's another idea. Because remember, what you want to do, Monty, when things fundamentally don't work and with the old model is you need to change the model fundamentally. You need to do some radical change. So here's one for you. I have 2 official Riot broadcasts, Monty. One of them is only for experts / all the fake pauses that pretend to be experts. So this one's going to have like Jat and Azael and people like that will be on this stream. And the whole point is you don't play by play on that one. We'll just talk about the game state and what's going on and what we thought about the way draft went. And we're calling up our own replays if we want and taking as much time as we want. The other stream, this is how cynical I'm going to be. The other stream is only play-by-play commentary. The other stream is Captain Flowers tagging into fucking whoever, Medic, into fucking whoever else you want, quick shot, and all they're doing is tickling your fucking little nuts with the adjectives like, oh, he comes in like the boss, you're fired, sir, next in, give it a break. Like, it's that all day long because the people who love that, you would actually unironically listen to Captain Flowers read a phone book to you. You'd be like, it's incredible. What he did on the 0700s. Incredible work, my man. So I think we've cynically made the 2 real broadcasts. Let's stop fucking around with a bit of this and a bit of that. It's not a peanut butter jelly sandwich, mate. This is like fucking oil and water. They don't mix. So just have the pleb stream where y'all are just, oh my God, it's like I'm blind listening to radio from the 1920s baseball. Or just have one where it's all like, yes, according to Kikaku, the way the draft went out in the way that he, and Ellen would never imagine that I would know that he imagines that I know that he wouldn't know what I know because I don't know it. Like, let's just do that. Let's just fucking go ham. That's what I think. There you go. And then a third stream at all times, whether he wants to cast or not, Doublelift should just have to give his thoughts on everything. I actually want Doublelift for real to have the joke is you don't need a truth serum. He already just says everything anyway. I just want him to I'm the opposite of the rest of you. I want him to never stop talking because the more he talks, the more entertaining it gets for me. The joke is I would actually, after all the things I've said about trying to be an elite, I would just as a guilty pleasure watch that Doublelift stream. That's all I'd watch all day long. That's all I would watch. I'd need to hear what he has to say. Like, I told you this one before, Monty. Someone will have to go get that clip. In fact, here's what I needed to do. Right, producer, write this down. This clip we're going to add to that big document for when we're high and we're doing like a freeze pipe thing in the future. We're going to watch the clip, Monty, that I've told you about before, where Doublelift, Meteos, and Sneaky, 1, nightmare blunt rotation. 2, you wouldn't even know if they're in a nightmare blunt rotation when they talk. Because this is the one I've told you about, where they debate the million monkeys with a million typewriters scenario. And the way that they debate it, it's like I feel like each of them are just losing brain cells as they talk. We're going to have to look it up because that will be so good if we're high and watching it. It's fucking primo. It's primo.
All right, that'll be some freeze pipe content for later this year.
I'm on rewatching myself, mate. It was so good. Let's
talk about LPL a little bit because this week was the alleged banger between JDG and Top Esports. It turned out to be a rather one-sided affair for JDG, and I think the question now becomes like, is anybody going to stop JDG this year because they look so fucking good?
People think I'm exaggerating, They've won the first split. They didn't lose a series once they got to the playoffs. They won MSI without losing a series. As you're saying, they look like the best team in the LPL still. Like, there was already that series against like anyone's legend or whatever. That like, but for some reason, the LPL teams always have one game against a bad team that they like almost lose. Because you can just tell it's like, there's no way they give a fuck. Like, they play a million games.
They also just got back from MSI, you know what I mean?
Assuming they win this split, Worlds is it after that. And I have to say, with the format now, like as long as Swiss doesn't end up fucking them, this could actually be the team that does the Grand Slam, mate. It's going to be wild if it happens, because I told people, one, the idea an LPL team does it, and then even bigger, the idea they do it with a Chinese mid laner, that will change League of Legends forever. Like before that, it is just Korean mid laners. Korean mid laners are the story of League of Legends, like Doinb, fucking Scout, Rookie. These are all Koreans. Like the difference between a Chinese guy winning a mid, that could also, by the way, itself have an interesting effect on popularity in China of the game and how much people care about it culturally. So no, the big problem is everyone's been waiting this split for them to actually fall. We'll spoil it. Even though Billy's really good again, they got dusted off by like you say, top esports, Rookie's back in form. They're actually looking pretty good at times. Jackie Love's had some good games. That was a bomber. Like in a way, because the games aren't good, I'm just marveling at the fucking greatness, Monty. Like this really does look like it's going to be one of the best teams to ever play League of Legends.
I absolutely agree. And especially if you compare. So first off, we thought there's always the question in League of Legends, like when you create a super team, when you make the vitality, does it actually just implode because the players can't figure out how to play a specific style, or if they're going to mesh, or if they're going to ego each other within the game? Like you just never know how that's going to turn out. With JDG, it worked almost immediately, despite the fact that Ruler doesn't know any fucking Chinese. I'm sure he does now, but at least at the start, right? Yet even then, right off the bat, they seem to be doing really, really great things with the amount of star power on this roster. And a lot of the complaints that you might have had of JDG early in the spring, well, Kanavi's kind of like inting some games in the early game, and that has led them to fall behind. And if they're behind, if they're ahead, they snowball extremely effectively. They're probably the deadliest team in the world if you give them an early game lead. But if they're behind, maybe they would drop some series. Like they would kind of alternate Kanavi inting, or like Ruler would kind of int in a series at times. But ever since we've seen the playoffs in MSI, Kanavi's been in excellent form. That was one of the questions coming into MSI. Well, how good is Kanavi going to be? The answer was he's going to be extremely good. And he continues to be very good this split. So what are the flaws in this roster? Right? It's almost ridiculous to watch this team play, because 369, what's so unfair about this is they will weak side 369 constantly, but then 369 will just get a solo kill in top lane. So while all the pressure has been coming bot and you're getting Ruler ahead and you're skirmishing on the bot side of the map around the dragon, 369 is just getting leads for free in the top side. So now everybody just has a lead on JDG, and then they just completely shit stomp you. This team is just ridiculous. They're just ridiculous.
To me, here's the difference. If you remember the famous RNG that didn't win the Grand Slam, they blew it because the World's Meta swapped to solo lanes instead of AD carry, and they had fucking Uzi Eye. That won't happen in this team, guys. One, the 369 guy used to be a carry player. He could easily switch tomorrow if you want to play through top. Meanwhile, Ruler played on the fucking Samsung, where he just mastered that skill of, like, if you need to weak side ADC, weak side ADC. Like, this team has so many avenues to win through. By the way, I will say, though, this was one of those weeks where if you can RV, you're going to look good. Because fucking hell, not only does that Tian guy win every bloody Dade award, he's such a fucking fraud. Like, it's like, I remember there was an episode of Seinfeld back in the day, Monty, where it was like the joke was that when people are in different lighting, sometimes they look really good looking, but sometimes they look really weird, like nothing like the same person. So there's one where George is dating this woman who looks like a model if she's in the right lighting, but then when she's in the wrong one, she looks all deformed. Like, don't look at me. That's Tian. Like every time he has like some fucking pop-off Lee Sin game, like right.
We put him in the spotlight.
Yeah, you're like, fucking hell, this guy's cooking. Give him the MVP. But then after that, you're like, wait a minute, let's take a closer look in the pan. The next week, he's just cooking up dog turds. Like, what the fuck is this? Like, and he has inted so many mid laners. It's mental at this point in time. Like, I don't know. I don't get how people like that just have a career the whole time. Like, I guess what they do, it's like every sports team. Even if someone's like a troubled star, there's always another franchise like, maybe we're the ones who can be the whisperer, the Tian whisperer, and get him out of his funk. And then, we just like think of all the extra like added plus EV from having him when he's really good. Because fucking hell, this guy's so criminal. He can just be really good or an absolute bomb. Why is there no in between?
Yeah, I think it is pretty ridiculous. But yeah, I think like you look at JDG's performance right now, and like you say, who is going to stop these guys? They have to your point about 369. He's known for his tanks now, yes, but your point about carries. His top 4 most played champions are Renekton, Jace, Kennen, and Gangplank. It's only at 5 you get to Ornn, and 6 you get to Sion, and 7 you get to Gragas, right? So you might know him as Ornn, Sion, Gragas right now, but that he can certainly swap and hit a different kind of meta if he has to. Like he is the guy like Keen who can kind of do it all. Except 369 is arguably the best like tank team fighter in the world. This team is crazy good. And they should be, because as I've intimated before, what I've heard is that they're spending $16 million on this roster, which is by far the highest of any League of Legends team to have ever existed. It's absolutely ridiculous. So anything short of them winning a world's title would probably be a disappointment. But given the state of the LCK right now, where KT looks good, but a lot of that is also that there are some pretty serious flaws in the other top teams within Korea. And the fact that JDG is just cruising through this LPL league that is mega stacked, by the way, so easily, I think is just a portent of things to come. Anything other than JDG winning World, they should, almost no matter what happens, guys, even if they don't win LPL playoffs, I still think, barring some really outrageously bad performances in playoffs, even if they don't win, even if another team pops off, JDG is still probably the world's favorite going in, just because of the star power on this roster, right? Like maybe another team gets really hot in a certain meta, but that meta won't be the world's meta. We know that meta will be changed by the time Worlds rolls around. So on any kind of reset, you almost have to favor JDG regardless. Yeah, it's going to be a tough road, I think, for anybody looking to beat these guys. But obviously, like, real pleasure to watch right now. And the LPL in general, the top end of the LPL has gotten so fiercely competitive. It's a much more, I would say, entertaining league on the whole, because you have probably 7 teams that are worth watching in the LPL right now, because suddenly WE is also good, and LNG made upgrades at the ADC position, and Weibo has done surprisingly well again. So it's there's a lot of stacked competition.
What needs to be said is this, Monty. EDG last split until the playoffs was one of the best teams. They're essentially not even relevant now, and it's still a mega stacked league. Like, that's how fucking cracked this league is, guys. Because EDG, that Uzi I move didn't work, though. It's not a good state of affairs.
They didn't want to make a move, right? That was outside forces that were pressuring them. So one of the things with EDG is Fofo fell off, and the other thing is Leave, their star ADC, had the out of game scandal that forced him to leave the roster. So their main carry is now gone, and it's hard to replace that. And they were kind of a team that was more than the sum of their parts due to their macro play, but Fofo hasn't been it so far this split, and that's led to other teams kind of taking that upward momentum that they had, especially because teams were getting better. Like OMG was getting better as LPL dragged on and into the playoffs. Like Billy was getting better throughout the playoffs, and they've actually maintained that trajectory, while EDG has made some roster moves that were not favorable and fallen down the rankings.
I'll also just never be able to take 4-4 seriously, because that is his name, and it reminds me of that Tupac line, like, my 4-4 makes sure none of your kids grow. So there you go.
I'm not familiar with that line. I have to
look it up. It's a great line.
from that era of
himself, that if I had to guess, I don't think that's why.
From that era of rap, I'm more of a BIG fan than a Tupac fan. Gotta say.
Okay. I mean, he's dead as well, so it's fucking drawing it. Like, no one wins that one. They're all dead. Dead now, of course. Or is he? Or is he on Elysium?
Or are they dead?
Yeah.
Sometimes they're holograms. Who knows?
Who knows? All I'm going to say is some of those albums they made of Tupac later did seem like the Chappelle split. Like he was just writing albums for them behind the scenes and giving them to them and putting different beats on it. That was that all really written in 1995 or whatever? I don't know if it was. I don't know about that one.
Do you have any other topics? We can touch on the LEC. We only really talked about Vitality in LEC so far. and the disappointment there. But I think a good point to bring up is probably Fnatic and their surprisingly good form.
The shipment, yeah. I mean, the joke is, this is why if you never get a respite if you're a Reckless fan, because him just not being there has now allowed what actually might be like the best fucking ADC in the region to now come into the league. Like, this guy is really cracked out, the Noah guy. He's actually really good. And it's just put everything else into place. Like, I saw there actually was an interview, it was one of the games that Razork did, where he essentially like inadvertently said the quiet part out loud. Monty was like, now of course we can play with like the bot. It's not always just topside count up, but like he essentially gave away that it didn't work with the Reckless lineup. And then the Trymbi move, those Koi guys are just fucking it up left, right, and centre, mate. How they've let a play like that get away in exchange for Advienne, like, that's one of those, like, this was the worst trade deal in the history of, like, give me a fucking break. That's a nightmare, that one right there. So I think the Fnatic lineup just looks mega. They are also feasting on the fact that, like, LEC is a bit weak right now. Like, essentially, outside of G2, it's just G2, Fnatic, and maybe Mad Lions. That's it. Everyone else is wacky as fuck. BDS can be shit one game to another. Astralis is up and down. You look at, like, fucking, who else is even relevant at this point in time? I mean, all that needs to be said is Excel's won 3 games. Excel. Vitality was in all the games, but then only won one. Like, the league is pretty whack. So with that said, it's actually Fnatic are almost giving me life, mate. Because aside from G2, what else would I have to watch? Like, I actually enjoy watching the Fnatic team play. It's good. They've even somewhat fixed some of the other problems. Like, look, Humanoid and Razork are clearly never going to have some great synergy. I've basically heard behind the scenes, Monty, Humanoid's contract is just enormous. And spoiler, nobody wanted either of those players. Like, which top team's gambling? Like, give me Razork and you can have this good player. Give me Humanoid and you can have my good mid lane. No one. So as a result, it's one of those ones where it's like you're just trapped having to keep fielding them because like you've just done a bad deal on the contract, so you ride it out. But even with that said, like Razork looks like a new player, mate, since the Noah guy came. He looks way happier. He looks way more in game, like he isn't hesitant. He just goes for his plays. I don't even think the Oscar Aaronin guy's that good. It just doesn't matter. Like if you have an ADC, it's that good in this matter. It doesn't matter. He can just he's just kind of chilling. He's just been chilling. I
mean, he's been fine, but he doesn't. Right. His job is not to be super good on this roster. And to your point about Razork and Humanoid, yeah, I don't think that the changes have necessarily done a lot to fix this synergy, but what it has done, and I think this is most critical, is it has brought Trymbi to the mid lane on roams more frequently. Like Trymbi has been freed up. So in a way, like he is actually propping up Humanoid and making sure Humanoid gets these leads. And Razork has been individually good on his own as well. Like Razork is, I think, having quite a good split. But sure. This is just having an extra man on the map is in some ways helping the issue that existed previously where they kind of had the bot lane completely glued to the bot lane, but Noah's a carry that can be trusted to be left on his own at times and make some plays. So it's been good. I mean, I think it's been really good. Noah has been fantastic.
Whoever scouted that guy full fucking marks.
He comes from KT. He was a sub on KT and part of their challengers team for a while. So it's not like he hasn't been around the professional scene. He just hasn't really gotten a shot at tier 1. And he was playing, I believe, for a Polish team in the ERLs, and then was given a shot into Fnatic and has been great. Now, probably a lot of that too is getting Trymbi. And as I understand it, like Trymbi personality wise wasn't fitting in very well on Rogue. And like, that's always one of those questions where,
just when they say that, it's like, what, is he not a fucking loser who just likes to just have shit teammates and get progressively worse and have no chance to win?
Exactly.
You know what? You don't really fit our family here at the, fucking evil telecoms warehouse. I'm not really sure you have the right team player attitude, Trymbi. So we're going to have to, I'm afraid, demote you to Fnatic, one of the best teams in the league. See ya. Like, give me a break.
Yeah, and that's the question, right? Is like, you never know what was going on behind the scenes, but I think that was a part of why they didn't want Trymbi anymore. Obviously, that was a huge question mark among fans and from us at the time because we rate Trymbi extremely highly. His champion pool is enormous. He's been an extremely impactful player. He has been the first, like, I think, star support in quite some time in a league that has been dominated by Hylissang,
Mickey X.
and Mickey X forever. Like forever. Yes. And he was the one who looked like maybe this would be an opportunity for a new support player to join the ranks of Europe's elite. And he's showing that off right now. And he's really empowering this roster, and he's making his effect known on the other lanes of the map, and has made Humanoid, who is a player who has been rather up and down, look quite good. And if this roster, if Humanoid is motivated again, because I think that's one of the kind of key issues with Humanoid as a player, is whether he's motivated to play. If this honeymoon phase going to restore his motivation immediately before Worlds, then great, because we know he can be very good at international tournaments. He was really good at Worlds last year. He was really good. So if he can get there again with a better team, like maybe Fnatic can gel enough, get enough synergy, but by the time Worlds rolls around, they might give us at least some level of confidence on an international level.
Also, here's the hilarious thing. In a weird way, this is actually all thanks to Reckless. Because if Reckless didn't do that role swap, Monty, I guarantee they'd just keep him at Fnatic. Like, he's the brand, isn't he? Like, that's all they've got left at that point in time. And if they'd have kept him, none of this shit would be happening now. Like, it's not even like because he would play terribly. If he'd have just played how he was the last split, which was all right, they just wouldn't have any of this shit going on. So, like, actually him role swapping and then not being in the team has allowed them to do this banger, not only upgrade at ADC, but then also getting an interesting support angle. It's all just working. It's all just fucking looking great right now. It's why also I love this format, because instead of waiting, Monty, and having to see 9 weeks of these VO1s and then go, are they good? Are they good? Like I've seen with XL a few times, and they're like, oh, no, they're not good in the first playoff series. I'm going to see them in best of threes next week. Like, you know, like a week and a little bit, I'll be watching them play a best of threes. And then if they're good, they'll be in the playoffs. And then if they do really awesome, I see them in that fucking summer finals thing. That's the other part people they keep forgetting about LEC, Monty. It's not just the 3 splits. Then you have that big, like, finals playoff. I think it's actually going to, again, just like MSI, once this whole format has played out, everyone's going to want it. Like, how can you go back to LCS after you've watched this? Like 3 mini splits.
Well, this is what you're getting at LCS.
No, you better add. This better be what they switch to next year, for sure. But I'll be way more interested to watch it if you eliminate 2 teams and get rid of best of threes. I think it'll actually be a shot. There's one thing we didn't bring up. The LEC format, I think, would absolutely give LCS a shot in the arm. Like, that'll make it way more interesting. Because what it does with the narratives is way better as well. I just find it really fun.
You and I have talked about this privately, right? But I think the best thing LCS could do is adopt a Flashpoint format.
That would be the shit, wouldn't it? Especially if they did it like we
the one we designed is actually better than the LEC one.
And yes. And you make all the rivalries, because then it's like we pick you for our group, and like that would go. If people don't get it, the joke was, the reason I know that is goated is because they had to like prod Koreans with a stick to make them trash talk like that. You already have all the fuckers in LCS. Like, Blabber is actually delusional, guys, and thinks he is like a fucking top 10 jungler of all time or something. Like, just give the guy the mic and have him explain why they've picked this team that they're winning scrims against. Sven's gonna have some fucking angle. They're gonna have so many narratives that will come out of that if you do it right, I think.
And I think LCS needs that more than LEC, obviously, because the viewership is totally fine in LEC and it's functioning as is. And I do think that slight differences in formats are good between regions. But for those of you who don't know, guys, the idea of the Flashpoint format was that the teams themselves would be selecting their opponents into groups, and you actually have them talk about why they do that in Trash Talk. It was inspired by the group selection ceremonies that used to happen in StarCraft back in Korea, to provide context to what Thorin was saying about the Koreans trash talking. And so I think if you do that, you can actually spin up quite a few narratives within the LCS and create a lot of content surrounding that and grow those rivalries. Because right now, the problem that you face within LCS is that nobody cares, because we all know they're not going to be competitive on an international stage. So you have to give people an additional reason to care. And this is an additional reason, is to see rivalries play out. And they've done a very bad job of sparking those rivalries. And so I think you got to kind of make it a little more confrontational in terms of the format and the way that you are spinning stuff out. So
what now?
what now, indeed?
Is there anything else topical to talk about? Anything going on at the moment?
I mean, I think LCS, we could talk about FlyQuest a little bit, because they look like they're completely dead in the water.
By the way, that whole doubling down on FlyQuest thing starting to grate a little bit, Monty. Are we still doing that? Do we have to hold the line? How's that work? Can we be scabs? Can we just cross over and hit them now?
No. Surely, Thor. The answer is this. Surely they don't go 0-9 and lose to every single team in the round robin.
He's tripling down.
Do that.
It's MonteCristo with the triple down. What's he doing? This is, by the way, one of the worst razor cakes of all time. Because this one's just only razors, like bloody fucking cake in it. My gums are just bleeding everywhere.
It's just a cake razor.
The joke is it's just an actual razor made in the shape of a cake. Yeah, exactly. There's just one cherry on top. Because the maddest thing about this one, remember, was last year's lineup looked pretty good anyway. Then it's like you get one of the only on paper bona fide upgrades you can get at support position. You get him in there. You obviously have like all these other players. Like everything about this looked tasty as fuck. Even after week one,
the Scrimbucks too. The Scrimbucks were the ultimate bait, by the way.
Yes.
I've seen comments and people are like, "Oh, Monty, I've heard that they weren't doing so well in scrims." These are social media comments. I'm like, guys, I know how they're doing in scrims. I know people, right? They're telling me.
That take is so whack because how they phrase it. They go, I've heard, who the fuck are you and what connections do you have? Guess what? There's an old tramp who heard something in a fucking drain pipe. But you go ask him what he thinks. Like, you don't have my connections, you dumb fuck. It's like when people tell me, that's not what Reckless is like, bro. You'll never know what he's like. I at least have a chance. Like, you know what I mean? Give me a break.
Right. I think probably, the Scrimbuck situation has changed now, but I'm talking about what was happening pre-week one when they were coming into the LCS. But to the point, surely they can't lose to every single other team in the LCS. That would be one of the most complete failures in terms of hype versus reality of a League of Legends roster that we've ever seen. Like, that's up there with like the Misfits collapse in Europe of, trying to create a super team there. But going from being a contender and then upgrading their support with the best North American support player, which was their main flaw, and then going 0-6 is absolutely unreal. And
to be fair, though, thematically, if you think about it, since they are a company that isn't about, winning, having great players, excellence at esports, they're actually an esports company about checks notes, some weird environmental flex. Okay, go with that. So what you need to do if you wanted to grow future really good rosters is like a forest ecosystem, Monty. You can't just have a load of like trash and plastic and fucking metal that's going to be all like unsightly and fucking up the environment. What you need to do is you need what currently is there, the livestock that's currently there, to gradually decay, turn into actual shit from which you will be able to birth the next generation. So in many ways, they're just responsibly closing down this FlyQuest lineup. Next year's could be a banger after the bog that's going to be fucking letting off its foul stench here.
I have an interesting question for you. If they go 0-9, do you?
It's the fact that's actually on the table now. I can't handle it.
If they lose to every team in the LCS in the first round robin,
yeah,
do you just destroy this roster immediately? Like, I don't know what their contracts say, but do you literally just fire all of your players and run an academy roster for the rest of the year? You could save 6 months of money by doing that potentially.
The problem is, I almost certainly wouldn't fire Prince anyway. I would probably gamble I can keep him and build around him next year. So maybe Impact, I'm not sure. The problem with the Impact one with them, and that's one we never bring up. The problem with the Impact topic is this. It's a bit like the Xmithy one. Yeah, you can be the guy who doesn't always practice that hard and maybe you'd phone it in a little bit, but he always picks it up for the player. It's like what I kept telling people. It's like the Wonder story. Like, he doesn't properly play the game. He's just first time and shit, but lol, he just wins anyway. It's like the second you don't win, that doesn't become as cool a story. So the one thing about the Impact one is he wasn't really going to play for 30 years. Like, eventually he's going to retire. Like, eventually even he's going to go. Like, I had to learn this myself. It's okay, Impact. I used to be getting those $1,000 a day once it got up to that day rate in CSGO. There was the times where I had to be like, wait a minute, but to say no, I have to say no to like whatever $5,000. Like, eventually you just learn, like, I'm just going to have to do it, aren't I? It's just the right move. So eventually either he's going to turn down the check or he's just not going to be good enough anymore. So if I wouldn't fire everyone, Monty, because to me, you got Prince over here. He did show some good form early. I would gamble he'll be good again. I'm not sure about the Vulcan one. He better perform. If they don't perform, there's no point pairing the two together. But on paper, those are two very good players. The other ones, I might just say get the fuck out. Like, spoiler, Speaker's just been whatever. I think
he's been kind of bad, actually.
We gave this guy years because he was the best on a bad TSM team. We just gave him a break for years. Like, you have to actually do it, mate. Like, to me, he hasn't been that good for a while. Vikla has just been a fucking travesty. Like, that actually is one of the most egregious, like, serial sets of ints I've seen in years, mate. Like, it actually bombs me out because he was so much better in LCK. He just was. He would have pop-offs every now and then. And then the whole angle of, like we say, you did the on paper best upgrade you could for bot lane, and it didn't really make it better. Like you almost do have to fire almost everyone, but I would keep Prince. What would you do?
Well, I mean, it depends on how Prince and is working with Vulcan, right? Like, do you give more time for that? Because, like, frankly, I mean, what was so disappointing was that they got clapped by Double Lift in the first game of the season, just like getting destroyed in the laning phase. So, I mean, I'm looking at that and I'm like, what the hell is going on here? Like, this is not acceptable. I think what I do is something crazy. Like, I think you Cloud9 this roster, and if they continue to lose and like you don't have any kind of hopes of getting to Worlds like feasibly, I think you leave Vulcan in the starting lineup, and then you replace the other 4 players with your challenger roster. Because the thing about the challenger roster is they have Winsome, and Winsome's a known quantity, but you might as well give all the rest of these players at least a shot, move everyone else into the challenger system, or get rid of them, right? I think you get rid of Vikla and just get a new challenger mid laner if you can, and save on some cost, because there's no point to continuing spending money if this is going to be the performance, because it's been absolutely miserable. And they keep finding new ways to lose. It seems like nothing can go right for them. They're trying different compositions. They lose those compositions. And the biggest issue is it looks like they've lost so much now that now no one is willing to pull the trigger. No one is willing to call the shot, because no one wants to be the voice that causes them to lose now. If you take a look at that game that they played last week against EG, they were just allowing objectives to go for free, even though they had compositions that could like muscle in on the Baron. You know, they could take control of the map with the front line of like Maokai and Malphite and like try and make a play, but they just refuse to make a play. And they're like scared that they're going to lose. So then of course they just lose because they do nothing. So if nobody's going to be the shot caller and say, this is what we're going to do, we're going to go in, we need to fight. If they're too scared to do that now, then it's over. Like, the whole thing is fucking over.
I'll give you 2 other angles as well. One, the fact that Vikla's an import, you're gone tomorrow, mate. Like, that's over. I'm getting a better import no matter what happens. And then the other one is, look, I get that it's a dreaded thing to say because we already did this once. I'm just firing Song again. It just, LCS ain't for you, mate. I'm sorry. Back to Korea you go. Just keep doing whatever you were doing over there. But it doesn't work out when apparently when there's someone in the room that goes like, hey, bro, like that just cancels your whole skill set out. That's like a fucking aura effect in Magic the Gathering for this creature.
I just don't understand how Song can go from the great coaching that he must have done in order to get a world championship with that fucking DRX roster into apparently the players just don't listen to him. And we're just subjected to these games from FlyQuest that I would think these would be fixable problems for him, because his core, Song's core ability is being able to look at players and get the most out of their strengths, right? Isn't that what he does? Isn't that what he just did for DRX? Crazy. Absolute insanity that this could be happening. And then you get styled on by Rich's Quinn, which he takes from KT as a Renekton counter.
Mate, I'll tell you what, that's the other thing about LCS that will never make any sense. It's like, why is he even in the LCS? Like, why is the guy who's like, it's a faker of hearts? Like, spoiler, they still don't even say he's just a player in league. Like, he was actually on like V5 with Rookie. If you remember, he was like, he's been in the LPL, he's been in LCK, obviously. Like, why is he just on Dignitas now? What's going on? And also, like, no, I'll refer to that. Why? Why is he like how did they pick? Is Dignitas essentially using some sort of a randomized page generator for Gamepedia to select their roster? What is going on right now? This doesn't make any sense. Their coach is Sven Skaren, who is coaching Jensen, who is working with Santorin, a player who the joke is like, they're the Danish Razork and Humanoid who have no fucking synergy. They have anti-synergy. And then you've just got the faker of hots in top lane. Like, what the fuck is going on? It doesn't make any sense.
Also, with Dignitas, who would have guessed that, you know, those players, the Danish players that had synergy in the past, would potentially be the worst players on this Dignitas roster with no synergy, and that we would be talking about Rich and Tomo as the carries of this team. But that's where we are, I guess. Just LCS things, right? I mean, Diamond hasn't been good, but you know, Tomo is he's popped off in some of these games, and Rich is playing the counter picks. He's carrying on Cassante. Like
mechanics for sure, yeah.
Yeah, that's been something that's been working. And by the way, I think I am really disappointed that we are not seeing, like, for the first time, a team has not decided to do their own documentary series, right? And of course, it's FlyQuest, when I am just desperate to know what is going on behind the scenes. I want to be in these rooms with FlyQuest and see them going on these 03 weeks and see those conversations. That's what was so great about Excel earlier this year, was they were making fire documentary content that I got to watch and, you know, revel in the sadness. I don't even get that now from FlyQuest because they're not running that kind of content. So that's a bit of a bummer. Maybe they're going to film like the equivalent of Breaking Point, because some weird shit's going on. You got to know some weird shit.
The thing is, I don't think anyone in esports has the balls to do that. Like, the joke is TSM inadvertently used to do it every week because they're so dumb they didn't realize that was what their TSM Legends was like. But I actually do think it's still to this day, making that documentary is one of the most ballsy thing any major esports org ever did. Not least because, quite frankly, it made them look bad. It really did. Even people like Liquid, who generally was being quite professional, it doesn't look good to show you being disrespected by your young up and coming star. You know, like, there was so many parts that made them look so silly. But I mean, it is just killer content, though, isn't it? Like, you can't deny it's one of the best fucking documentaries of all time. And spoiler, yes, disclaimer, I am in it. So I'll say it like that. I'll just make sure I say it so you all know. And not for that reason alone.
Oh, man. I'm curious. I'm actually going to go back and look and see how many games FlyQuest won in a row, because I think they were 6-0 at the yeah, they were 6-0 at the start of last split. 7-0. So they were 7-0 before they lost their first game to TSM, and they ended the first round robin 8-1. So we could just be in a mirror scenario. But show me a time where a team has gone from, you know, top 2 till bottom of the league in LCS between spring and summer. That is a fucking insane flip. And by upgrading their roster, and they upgraded their roster in between. That is psycho. Clearly, it's some dark magic at work, something behind the scenes that is causing these issues.
I also just don't believe at all in, like, the fucking, like I've told you, there's no way Team Liquid's staying up there. Dignitas, I don't know how the fuck they're even 3-3. I don't know how 100 Thieves is so consistently bad. Like, the whole league is just a mess in the LCS, mate. It's all over the place.
Yeah, it's disastrous. All right. Any other topics for this week that you want to cover? Hit most of the good teams, the rising teams in the major regions. Guess we didn't talk about the good teams in LCS, but we'll see. The LCS is just so disappointing, I think, right now, that FlyQuest is the main story.
I think that's it. I think that's all the big stories.
All right. Well, let's do it then. Let's take a quick break, guys, and then we will come back with some viewer questions for you.
Right, we're going to do some viewer questions. We might be able to get through more this time because obviously we had a slightly short show, so we won't have to cut it off like we do on the past ones. If you don't know how to ask a question, you just have to be a subscriber to our Discord. So go to the Last Free Nation Discord, subscribe there. There's a channel you can ask questions for this show in, and Monty selects the best ones.
And by the way, guys, it is an amazing way to support us because we get 90% of the revenue. So thank you very much. There's a lot of you who do subscribe. That is really helping Last Free Nation. And if you want to be a fan who helps out a content creator, you should go do that. It's great for us. Also, nice Discord server just to have conversations on if you're into esports. Always talk about the latest matches that are going on. So fun to be in there in general. Do you see any downside to Team Heretics signing Odo Omne to replace Evie for 2024? Seems like he'd fill the same role, but much more competently than their current top while getting out of Excel. I mean, weirdly, Excel is doing okay right now. I think, obviously, I don't know the scenario with Evie and what Peter Dunn wants out of the top lane and how he's designing this team. But if they are going for a weak side top, then obviously Odo Omne getting out of that contract and getting on to Heretics would probably be pretty good for the roster.
I also think Odo Omne is a pretty bad player to have if you're on a bad team because he is a mega veteran, and because he's Romanian, they're also not the sort that fuck around. Like, they don't send you like a politely written letter if they don't like how something went in a scrim right now. They just turn and say it to your face, and he actually likes that style of like confrontational stuff. Well, the problem with that is that's great if you're in a really competitive team. It's like like if he was on Vitality, you'd be fucking banging. The problem is I could imagine in his team he's having a nightmare time right now, mate, and his style is weak side, therefore he's not able to carry the games. He has to hope that fucking bot or mid carries. So to me, I actually think that would be an amazing upgrade. I would love to see that for Heretics. Obviously, I don't know if he himself cares about going to that team, but you have to figure playing with someone like Jankos would be good. I will say he did just play with Ethio, so maybe I don't know if those two. I would imagine those are the two that don't have like the overlapping culture. They seem like one of them's more like the fucking I am not enjoying this, and then the other one's like so.
I don't know. I think there were so many problems with the Heretics management that I think it's hard to know if, they wouldn't have synergy with a different management and coaching staff, right? Who knows? After the Culture Channel in the first episode of Nerd Legion, plus Monty having hinted at the potential of going into classic sports, which sports would be the most likely to be covered by LFN? Probably the NBA and NFL, I would say, given maybe the current MMA? Roster of what? Sorry, was that?
MMA, maybe?
MMA, yeah, possibly. It depends on the current roster, like of talent and people who would be interested. But I think we have the most hosts who could reliably do shows in those sports. Not to say that we wouldn't be interested in other sports. I mean, I'm sure Thorin would love to do a tennis show, and we just don't have anybody to do tennis with him, right? So I don't know. I think those are probably the most likely because there are a lot of NFL/NBA/MMA fans within LFN currently.
I would say the thing to watch for is if I can get them to figure out how to do the footage part right. I mean, I could just do like one of my little short videos like that one about Deft at Worlds. I could just do that in a sport, like with my favorite quarterback or something like that if I wanted. So to me, there's a lot of like runway of things we can do in these ideas.
Yeah. And I think eventually we will get there. We have to make sure our esports content is still humming along, but we are starting some new stuff on the Culture Channel. Please go subscribe to Last Free Nation Culture on social media and on YouTube. Thanks for those of you guys who've already done that. Nerd Legion had to take a week break because Doa had a kid. So congratulate Doa also on social media. And we are going to record the next episode of that on Friday. So we'll be back on track for that moving forward. Thoughts on the end of Neon Genesis Evangelion? I mean, I like that show a lot because I think it subverts a lot of the expectations of the mecha genre and a lot of the complaints that I think are anime, like kind of anime stereotypes were actually quite revolutionary at the time. And it was because of Eva that some of the more like brooding qualities became kind of like anime memes, but it was really some of the, first anime media to explore a lot of the themes around depression and dysfunctional parent-child relationships. And honestly, as somebody who loves the occult, the way that they were utilizing Christian and like Hebrew mythology, I thought was really interesting, especially when filtered through a Japanese cultural lens. So I find it to be an interesting show.
Technically, they got you with a trick question, though, didn't they? Because there's two endings, Steve Angelio.
That's true.
There?
There's the end of Ava, the movie, which I also really enjoy. I did like, because I think what happened was they ended up running out of budget at the end of the TV show, so they couldn't actually make the ending that they wanted to. So end of Ava.
If you remember, it was like a psychological breakdown with like past clips playing again and again. Because as you say, they didn't have the money at the end of the TV show, so they just went for some like edgy fucking weird angle, didn't they? Yeah.
But I think like the idea of the unification of humanity is a super interesting theme, and the end result of like the Angels invasion, like it's a really cool show. I mean, I really like Ava as a concept.
I thought it was all right. The problem I have is that's another one of those shows where I had to learn the hard way about anime, which is one of the saddest things. Is I went and looked up things like the interviews with the guy who made this show, and I remember thinking like, why is he doing all this like imagery like that? And then what I found was what they do is, because they don't want every single show to just be like, right, it's Japan and we're in like feudal times and everyone's a samurai or a ninja, they just pick Western skins as though it was like making a chroma skin set for a line of champions in League and go, just put a bunch of Christian shit over the top. And what I found was this, Monty, is like the reason that doesn't have like a very satisfying ending to what it was like with Lilith and like the original clones is because they just did it as like window dressing. They didn't actually try that. That part didn't have a deeper meaning to it. I kept thinking like, oh, this is so provocative. Like, what are they trying to hint at here? What are they possibly going to work in here? And it was like, at the end, it was just all about the technocratic shit, wasn't it? Like, there wasn't really any like spiritual component in the same way they sort of implied. So I thought that blue balls me a bit. So I think the problem with that show is it is inevitably insanely overrated because it is the touchstone go-to one that if you are a 16-year-old hipster, you say that one's the one I like the best. And then there's also the factor that the joke is half the people who watch it and saying it's mega just take it at face value and don't realize it's like essentially it's like modern philosophy. You have to know what they're referring to and what they're critiquing. And if you don't, like, you're not going to get that much out of Nietzsche if you have no idea what schools of thought he's building on. It's not going to be revolutionary. So I think people watch that and they really think it is just like another version of Gundam Wing or whatever. Like, no, it's supposed to be like a meta contextual, like deep dive into like what it means to that genre and what it relates to, like you're saying, in family and life and Japan and all sorts of shit. So I would say this, to me, it's a flawed gem. Like, it's interesting. Some parts of it are good. I do think that original TV ending was absolute bollocks. Like, I remember watching it like, brilliant. So this is how it ends. After all that, like about 700 hours of waiting, like, get in the mech. Like, then at the end, it's just like, oh, I'm going mad. Like, brilliant. Because the other thing I can't handle about that, and I'm going to bring it up as well. I'm going to bring this up every time we talk about anime because you anime fucking weebs need to learn the hard way. Every one of your favorite shows contains an element that is by definition whack that isn't even necessary. So you know everyone loves Code Geass. He's going to fucking high school the whole time. Why is he going to high school? Make the whole show without him going to high school. It's way better, isn't it? But no, because you're all plebs. So if you know how they work in anime, they're trying to hit all the demographics. So what about the people who want the stupid harem shit in high school? So similar thing on this one.
Are we just going to ignore that they would go to high school whilst trying to save the world?
Are we just going to ignore that he's got this whole plot of this guy being a mech pilot, and then there's that shit with that like fucking penguin or whatever coming in and getting shit out of the fridge, like. You're just going to pretend that's not in the show. You're going to go around recommending it like it's Dostoevsky and going, that's an art form, though. What anime making? And it's got fucking like that penguin guy coming in and like, like, it's, what is that whack shit? What is that? It's not like when I tell you read Watchmen, you're reading it, and then halfway through, it's just like a fucking Garfield comic for 4 pages. Like, what are you talking? I hate Mondays. And
that's true. That is the. Well, it's also like, you know, if these people were expected to save the world, they would just be surrounded by like performance psychologists and optimizing them through training. They wouldn't be in fucking high school at the same time trying to deal with all of these other issues. Like, it's absolute insanity that would even be occurring. So yeah, I think you are correct. This is the problem with anime, is that it breaks tone and it tries to do too many things at the same time. And I think the The only show where I actually like that is FLCL because it's like so outrageously crazy that it kind of just all makes sense because tonally it doesn't feel like a giant shift because everything is fucking insane in that show. So I like that one. Not sure if Monty has watched it, but I know Thorin has. What is your favorite season of The Wire? I have seen The Wire. I love The Wire. I think season 2, which is the one with the dock workers that shows kind of the blue collar workers and how they are part and parcel of the drug trade. And you still get, the great performances by Idris Elba for Stringer Bell. So I think season 2 is probably my favorite. I think it's a really interesting dynamic.
Let me think. That's a tough one because if you don't know, probably the best thing about The Wire is that every single season is like a different part of the city and it's sort of showing you like a different aspect. See, it's the similar characters, but it's like a different vibe. So I don't know, actually. I actually, the thing I found most compelling that it was one of the best shows at reinventing itself. Like it wasn't like if you like this season. So I would say season 2 is great. Season 3 is a banger as well. Because the other thing is, this is why I never look up spoilers. You can never know where they're going to go next with the show. That's also one thing that I thought was really compelling about it. You can never tell what angle they're going to take next or how they're going to, like, once you watch season 2, for example, you're going to think like, how could there be 3 more seasons of this? But just wait and find out. Just wait and find out.
Yeah, I think also I liked season 4, which is the one that dealt with the school system. So like basically what's cool about The Wire is, as Thorin says, it's the same characters. Well, some of them die, obviously, but it's the same characters, but it's viewed through a different lens of the city. So like, season 4 is like, what is happening to these kids while they're in school, and it introduces teachers who are part, interacting with these kids. So it shows like different aspects of these people's lives, and that's what's so amazing about it. Yeah, it's great fucking show. I think it's probably the best TV show of all time. That's from an objective viewpoint. It's not my favorite. It is among my favorites, but I think in terms of the acting, writing, scope of the show, interest level, it is just phenomenal. Warcraft 3 related question for Monty. How do we save humanity, Todd, from the threat of the Scourge undead? I'm not sure there is any saving Todd at this point in time. Todd is one salty motherfucker. I gotta say that. Yeah, I'm not sure what this question is trying to ask. There is no saving humans from the undead. One of the problems with Warcraft 3 is that balancing 4 races is extremely, extremely difficult. So you always had like really bad matchups a lot of the time. And obviously humans versus undead was one of those that was quite undead favored and was never really solved. I think RTSs should probably stick to 3 factions instead of 4, just because it becomes too difficult.
By the way, I'll tell everyone an anecdote about Todd, the famous French player Monty's referring to. Back in the day in Warcraft 3, they had the most extreme version I've ever seen of like invite mania, where eventually, it's actually one of the reasons why people like Carmack wanted their tournaments to be open so anyone could qualify, was because eventually it got so they would have tournaments, so it was just all invites. It was like the same 8 players invited to every LAN, even if actually one of them's just like a legacy name who's not as good, and there might be some up-and-coming European player who's fire, but he's not a famous name, so he doesn't get the invite, right? When Todd went to one of these events, and I think it was in China somewhere, he went to an event, and basically when he was playing at the PC, he kept complaining, he is French, to the fucking admin all the time. Is it too hot? It's too hot. And then they were telling him, like, there's nothing we can do about that. Like, you've just got to start your game. And he was like, he basically told them like an ultimatum, like, if you don't get like a fan or like make it cooler here, like I'm not going to play. And so they tried to test his luck, right? They tried to call his bluff, Monty, and they told him like, well, you forfeit then. So this is what Todd's like, because back then everyone was on mad money as well. And they were all flying around the world as top players. He just got up and didn't play the tournament and went home, as far as I know. From China.
I mean, he's kind of a famous baby.
He's a cool guy, though. If you meet him in real life, he's way better than on the internet. Don't worry,
guys. But now he's just like, plays poker, does MMA, lives his life. Not really question, but I was rereading Romance of the Three Kingdoms, and there's a saying that goes, among men, Lubu, among horses, red hair. What do we think of among esports, Thorin?
What is Lubu?
Lubu is one of the main protagonists of the Romance of the Three Kingdoms, the famous like Chinese story, which I have not read.
Okay.
So I don't know
what relationship is he talking about? Like, who is the person who is esports or whatever?
Yeah,
Me? Aside from that,
you
though.
exactly. Yeah, exactly. I don't know. I think
Fake
they're
or
just
something, Flash or something. One of those people, right?
there. You go. What is the best way for me to facilitate the death of the LCS and the continuation of the LCK? Are there ways I can pay for the LCK broadcast to show my support? No, just watch it, man. We don't have to facilitate the LCS's death. It is terminal, guys. The LCS is terminal. Now, Riot can keep it on life support probably for quite a long time. They can drag this out, but I don't see, unless we see some really, really drastic changes to the structure of the LCS, ways to keep it alive. And LCK is just humming along, man. Now, the teams are not doing well in LCK, but I think that can be remedied much more easily by Riot, increasing revenue share potentially for them. And it will also be self-correcting. We are going to see LoL salaries for players crash around the world. That is going to happen. It's going to happen in Korea too. It's going to happen in China. And that'll be it. The problem will self-correct. I'm not super concerned about it. I'm sorry, I wrote this question below sarcastically a while ago. It was a reaction to someone asking an overly leading question. My follow-up was Red's. Okay, hold on. Oh, no, sorry. That's just somebody about the recall a time where you failed to manipulate or answer the question. It was in relation to something else that we forgot. So that's fine.
Okay.
Inspired by the 200th episode celebration, which was fantastic, by the way, what are your favorite esports urban legends? And can you confirm or deny their validity? I don't know. Do we have any esports urban legends?
Oh, there's got to be some. Let me think.
I mean, I can like famously one of the things that happened with Savior in Brood War was that, he was allegedly like out partying all the time and like, getting drunk and falling asleep in parks and like his team didn't know where he was a lot of the time. That was true, by the way. That was true. I know people who were working with him during that era of Korean esports, and he was definitely like living it up while
I've got one for you.
Stefano too.
It's actually tied to this exact topic. Here's the one, and sadly, there was someone I once had on record who said this in an interview, but then the interview could never be released, and then they later told me essentially, like, please don't release that. Like, if that info gets out there, actually, I've realised it'll look really bad for me. Basically, here's the urban legend. It's about Xavier. So, obviously part of the problem, Monty, is the time period when his game was dropping off a cliff individually was exactly the time period with the overlap with the match fixing, alleged match fixing, and encouraging others to match fix, right? So obviously, if this was a movie, you'd want to know, wait, did he just actually let himself be bad to match fix? Like, is he actually secretly sick? Here's the urban legend. And there are real rumors that this is legit. That even after he was done as a pro and he was a nobody, because of who he is, Monty, and all the top players revere this guy. He is like a player's player. He's one of those ones where they all think he was the shit at StarCraft. The urban legend is this, that he still used to be able to practice secretly with people like Flash and Jaedong, and he used to beat them routinely. You'll never hear that info ever from anyone else. That is real, though. I've heard that from real in the Korean scene, that he like still was a wizard at the game, and if he played secretly, but they had to do it on like Smurf accounts, that he was just amazing still. Which is what I can't lie. It's what I also secretly want to be true. So,
I definitely want that to be true because I love Savior as a player. So don't love the match fixing. Do love his genius at Brood War and the way that he brought Zerg into the forefront of the game.
I'll tell you one where this is like, I'll make it like an urban legend, but it's essentially just something there used to be rumors about back in the day. But I do know some of this is true. Right? Back in the day, Monty, before Adderall was a thing, which, by the way, hopefully one day we'll do a 4 Horsemen episode about this, because spoiler, I won't say which names, but there are some people who have had like mental breaks publicly, and everyone's like, it's a mental health crisis. That's literally like they've abused drugs like Adderall, and then they've gone to a point where they don't have it anymore, and they're having mad withdrawals, and they're having psychosis or something coming from that. It's one thing I heard from some people. So what I'll say is this, in the early 2000s, before people had Adderall, back in Counter-Strike, this is real, when they would have the big CPLs in Dallas, and people would all just get in a van and drive from wherever, some of the West Coast teams, unironically, were smoking crystal meth and playing Counter-Strike matches. And are you ready? I can't say who, but some of them finished top 8 at these World Championships, mate. For real.
What?
They were just tweaking the whole time.
Holy moly.
Isn't that mental? And this is how deep I used to go to be a fan back in the day. This will actually sound weird when I say it like that, but this is how much I cared about esports, guys. Back in the day, because a lot of these people, think about it, Monty, from the West Coast, They're in like a weird crystal meth scene, but they're playing video games. A lot of them, believe it or not, were Asian second-generation immigrants. There were people whose family was Chinese or Korean. And what was mad was, back then, this is a throwback and a half, it's how you know it has to be legit. Back then, loads of Korean and Asian people in America used to use a blog site called Zanga. That was the name of the blog site.
Yeah,
they all used. It was just super big in their community, right? And they all had it was almost like Facebook. They all had like profiles and they post blogs, but you would all like comment on each other's friendships. So even though this had nothing to do with Counter-Strike, when I found some of these famous players had blogs like that, I would just go and start following that, like, oh, what info is going on? And I just remember one time, one of the players in one of the teams that was doing the crystal meth, this is really sad. I remember reading his blog, and in his blog, because he's not talking to esports people now, he just admits he's actually addicted to crack as well. Like, for real, just straight up. And I'm reading it like, fuck it. And then I'm watching like the next he's in the game, like, what the fuck? This is back before you could ever know anything about people in real life. It's already crazy. So that's an urban legend. That's an interesting one. It's all good.
Wow.
It's all good. I got them all, mate.
Interesting times in esports for sure. Where is Bumper, the Overwatch tank, now? I miss Bumper. He was such a fabulously entertaining player for the Vancouver Titans in Runaway. I actually don't know. I mean, he basically like disappeared after the 2019 season and never saw him again, which is really disappointing because he was a great personality and he was just one of the craziest tank players in Overwatch. Like, just awesome play style, like very
People don't remember when that Vancouver Titans team was like a fucking revelation that year. That guy was like the whole reason why, right? Like,
it was a psycho, just like flank Reinhardt shattering people. Yeah, it's an interesting question. I don't know the answer to that. Thoughts on the World's qualifying series between LEC and LCS for a potentially 4th seed for either region? Yeah, it sounds great. And the potential amazing worlds we could have had if those 3.5 LCS seats were forfeited from the walkout. I know, man. Like, if that was one of the upsides to LCS being locked out, is that probably the other major regions would have each got an additional seed. And well, maybe that wouldn't be so great for Korea, because I'm not sure that the 5th best Korean team is going to be that interesting to watch at Worlds. The 5th best Chinese team would definitely be interesting to watch at Worlds. So I think there could have been some really fascinating Worlds competition had that happened. Really good
Monte, I don't have to on this show pretend to care about the things the fans watching the show care about, as the last 200 plus episodes have shown. So all I'll say is this: I don't know about you, mate. I'm up for just taking all the seeds and just giving them all to LPL and LCK. Just have like a 16-team tournament with 8 teams from each region. Put like fucking $10 million for first, nothing for second, third, fourth, or fifth. 10 million for first only, and let's just. And also, you know how in the modern day, if you win that Asian Games, you get like a military exemption. If you come last in this one, you get forced to go in the military immediately after the tournament in either China or Korea. I'm just saying, I think I could make a really compelling tournament. I'd love to watch this tournament. That's a damn deal 1.5. You're on the front lines tomorrow, motherfucker.
I think that LCS and LEC should play a gauntlet of each of the top 4 teams for every region, but only the winner gets to go to Worlds. So we only get one Western team as the great Western hope, and then otherwise it's just Korean and Chinese teams. That's what I want, guys.
I'm up for it.
Best and worst demonstrations of sportsmanship in esports.
In esports? Because the problem is there's not that many in esports, because obviously, like, it's all about admins and rules. There's not really like a thing you can do in the game usually to be sporting. Like, what would it even be for that?
Yeah, it's like dancing at each other at level 1 in River instead of auto attacking each other. Yeah, there's not honestly, like, sportsmanship hasn't really been a thing, and I don't actually care about sportsmanship that much because I think it often gets in the way of entertainment and trash talking in many ways.
I mean, I'll tell you one, but it's a really old school story. There used to be a really good American Quake player called C3, who was in the same era as Fatality and 04 and CZM, a lot of these great players of the time. And this guy was not only so good at Quake, but he just had he was like one of those West Coast, like, Asian guys who has the mega chill attitude where, like, nothing could ever get to them, just chill as fuck. And what he used to do, for real, at like one of the like CPLs that was like essentially a world championship, he would just ask the other player, Monty, like, what map do you actually think we should play? Because they had like a veto in that system. You'd just be like, what map do you want to play? And then they would all obviously just say their favorite map because they're like trying to win the tournament. And he would just go, yeah, let's play it, and beat him on it. That's gangster right there. That's like that guy was on some like English shit of like, right, fire a warning shot, give him like 100 yards, then let's hunt the little beggar down. Like, that's like he's giving him the head start, mate. He's giving him the sporting chance. I think that's gangster. I wouldn't do it myself. I would just fucking pick their worst map and shit all over and take the money. Don't worry about it.
Let's move on. Monty, have you ever tried a traditional English chippy? If so, what parts and thoughts? Also for Thorin, what are your parts of your favorites? Could be anything like fried Mars bar to curry sauce. Yeah, that shit rules, man. British people are really good at frying things, and fried food is delicious. I love curry sauce. I think curry sauce is awesome. I order that all the time whenever I'm in a pub. Oh, you're muted. He's gone.
I'm just testing if there's something wrong with like the input volume. Anyway,
Oh,
the problem is you have to realize that is like asking someone about going to a burger place. Like, you are eating low class food. It's not supposed to be like gourmet food.
Good,
I do think though, the thing that's underrated is, this is why Americans think of it. They're called French fries. You obviously don't know what the fryer's like in a fish and chip shop then. You are aware the fryer in a fish and chip shop is like the size of a car. Like, it's enormous because like the way you're going to fry it and what you're going to do with the batter, it's not the same as just being breaded. Like, I feel like people don't understand it at all. They're not, like you're saying, the curry sauce they have there. The joke is I can't get it in other countries because it's an incredibly cheap type of a sauce with a chemical flavor. But whatever that flavor is, we have the same thing in Chinese shops in England. They have a type of curry sauce they have that's a little bit different. That exact flavor is like ingrained in your psyche if you're British, basically, because you've had that one flavor a million times. So to me, I'd say it's more sort of like, it's the sort of thing where you go and have exactly the flavor profile you want. Like, for example, that's why they have pickled things there. They'll have pickled eggs or a gherkin, or you can get things like, if people don't know, it's not just ketchup. There's brown sauce, which is sort of like a vinegary sauce. It's a bit like, goes a bit well with like pork or meat. You can also, if like you're saying about the Mars bar, you can fry so many things. Famously, a sausage is quite nice, actually. You can have a burger that's fried, as in buttered, like it would be like a fish, but a burger. It actually makes it look, it's mega bad for you, but you can imagine it's fucking delicious. Like, as you're saying, if you really fry the fuck out of something, it will taste unbelievable, at least in that moment, in terms of like how satiating the flavor is. So
yeah, it's great.
Some of the classics, all the classics. Also, people don't know, the other one is a chip butty. So you just get some chips and you put it inside the bun. You can also get gravy. Now, here's the thing. We're not Canadians. We're not next to the fucking French out of choice. So don't leave the curds off. Leave that cheese curds off. Just put gravy on top of the fries and that's it. Just leave it at that. Or chips, whatever.
He's becoming more American. Oh no.
Sadly, I've done that on loads of things, but I even say elevator now. It's ridiculous. It's too late.
He's being corrupted. He's getting corrupted, guys. He's not even in America, and he's becoming more American. What was the best gift you've ever received? Interesting question. I think, as far as something that was surprising that I didn't ask for, when Doa and I left OGN, they actually gave both of us these big, like, not trophies, but like kind of OGN statues that say OGN and say like, thanks for everything you've done for the company, at our last finals. And as somebody who grew up watching Brood War on OGN, and you know, it was really a kind of fulfillment of a lifelong dream to be able to work with OGN when I moved to Korea. That was really quite touching to me, and that's something I still have on my bookshelf to this day. And I thought that was a really thoughtful gift by an employer and something that I really treasure. So that's what comes to mind for me.
My answer would just be an Amiga, which was like a sort of like, it's a bit like a PC back in the day, but you could play games on it basically. So that's the one that changed everything. When I got the Amiga, then I was living the dream. All those games, all those platformers, strategy games. I even used to be, back in the day, because you know this, like back in the day, lots of games were made for adults. Like, I used to have those games that when I was about like 10, I probably played like 100 hours in a game where I didn't really understand how it worked or what it was, or like, why am I building an army, or what you do with, like, even just the interfaces were hard back then. Like if you play like XCOM when you're like 11 or something, like,
yeah,
it's not easy. It's fucking, it's not like playing Mario, guys. So it was just super compelling to have a device that was like part part games machine, part PC. Like I used to even have back on the old Amiga, the fucking sound stuff that was super advanced at the time where you could make like music and shit, which at the time was like blowing people's minds. Like on a computer, I could do every instrument basically. I wasn't good at it, but you could in theory do these things. So at the time, that was like to me what I imagined to the 60s generation LSD must have been like. Luckily, I wasn't on LSD while I was on the Amiga. That would have really blown my mind.
Do you have any tips for getting into CSGO from someone coming from Brood War, StarCraft 2, and League? I tried watching a few times, but I feel like I don't get the strategy at all, so it just looks like two teams wildly running at each other. Of course, I understand that scoring kills is a good thing, but without understanding any context, map positioning, econ, it all feels very random. I feel like it's pretty easy to start understanding this stuff once you start watching the game in earnest.
That sounds like such a sus question. Like basically, it's like he was
like
grilling himself and he broke while answering. Like what he really means there is he's watched like one CS game ever.
Yeah.
He made it like I've watched it a few times, but it looks like people just kill each other. No mention of bombs, defusal, no mention of map code. He doesn't understand even the fun. I don't know about that. So what I would say is this: there's two ways you can do it. One, just go and watch the more skilled players. So pick like Simple or something like that, Zewu, Shiro. Watch their skill level. That alone's entertaining. That's the equivalent of a dunk or a 3-point shot. Right. And then what you need to learn is the most fundamental concept, which is the terrorists are trying to get onto the bomb spot to plant the bomb. And also, here's a little freebie for you. Once the terrorists plant the bomb, they become the defensive team. So in some of the ways, the dynamics of the game can flip within a round. So if, by the way, here's the thing. I'm not here to proselytize. So there's some basics. If you don't like it after that, just fucking watch something else. There's a billion options.
I also just feel like if you see one of the maps a few times, like you kind of understand where the angles are and where the critical points are, like, you know, Banana and Inferno, for example. It's not that difficult to understand and get hyped about it. You just need to spend some more time watching it. It's much easier than most other esports, so I'm kind of confused that this would be a question. What is your favorite rivalry in esports and why? Come on, man. It's the telecom war for me. I was always a Korean esports fan. SKT versus KT stretches all the way back to Brood War. Has been, you know, continuing now since both teams got into League of Legends. Like, it's just the all-time great esports rivalry. That's it. It's always hype.
There's two for me. So one is just a classic Quake one, which is Rafa versus Cooler. And in part, it's because they actually had similar like styles and the way they would put together plans. And it really was like some anime, like game within a game within a game shit, where it was all referential to what they did last time. And then the other one, just I think it is just the greatest true rivalry ever, is Flash versus J-Dog. Because like these guys for real did the Nadal Federer shit where it's like, if the other guy doesn't exist, or I just win everything and become the GOAT like a million times over. But they would literally contest each other year on year, back and forth. Like, it's fucking amazing.
Thorin has often talked about evergreen players like Soaz and LoL. If you had to build a roster in the West, NA/EU of these evergreen players to make worlds in either region, who would you choose? So Western player, evergreen players. Well, I mean, Caps is definitely in that list at this point in time, given the longevity of his career. So Soaz, sure, in top lane, has been phenomenally consistent. Jankos in the jungle has to be in there. I would say Caps probably in mid lane. AD carry, who we pick as AD carry?
They're not going to like it, but it's either Reckless or Upset.
I mean, Double Lift has had a very long career too.
Problem with him is he sort of just fucking phoned it in for splits to get the longevity, didn't he? So,
that's true. Still the greatest, you know, native North American player. And support. I mean, it's probably like Hylissang or Mickey X, right? I feel like this is not very hard.
How many wild cards just quickly? Because here's the thing: this is just pure Thorin bias. So I'm going Odoamne top lane. Got to have that weak side. I'm going Jankos as jungle. Already worked with Odoamne. Great shit there. Amazing jungler. Frog in mid lane. Listen, mate, farming's never going to go out of style. That's my boy Jovi. Then we're going to have Upset at ADC. That's right. He's actually fucking world class for years. And then I'm going to have Mithy as his support, because Mithy had quite a few years where he was really good. So there's my lineup. I like them apples.
Not bad. I started watching UFC a few years ago. Can you name your most epic fight cards or title runs by a fighter over the history of the sport? I can't, because I'm not a big UFC fan, but Thorin might be able to.
The problem with that is, like, in terms of listing fights, you have to realize there would be like, the list would be like 100 fights long. So like, I'll give you, like you said, the runs. Like, I actually think GSP's run was very, very impressive. Technically never lost while he was the champion. Like, that one was just amazing because he essentially fought every style of fighter and found a way to neutralize them all. And just, except for that one fight against Johnny Hendricks, he always looked convincingly better than the other person. I would say Fedor's run back in Pride, because he was actually an undersized heavyweight who just wrecked all the best heavyweights. If you were like some super striker, you never knock him out. If you're some fucking Brazilian jiu-jitsu guy, he just beats the fuck out of you while he's in your guard. If you're some wrestler, like good luck, he's got amazing takedown defense. I think John Jones, when he first came into like the top end of the UFC, even though he was fighting a lot of people who were like just at the end of their like primes, he took down just all the legends. He has one of the craziest like murderers raw of like title fights I've ever seen. I would say in the modern day, look, it's a little bit lighter on names, but the McGregor run was fucking incredible. Like, not only where he was winning, but what he was doing as a star in the sport. Anderson Silva will always be an all-time go-to. Just skill level was insane. He was in the fucking Matrix. He was the scariest guy probably ever. When he was at his peak, could knock anyone out in any way he wanted. Was obviously doing that showboating shit where he was intentionally fucking with people. Like, I think a lot of the great champions just have epic runs in the UFC. It's one of the best spots ever.
Have any of you read the original novel Foundation by Asimov? If so, thoughts on the novel series or the TV adaptation? I have not read the novel nor seen the TV series on Apple Plus, so I
read the first book, but that was like unironically like 20 years ago, and it was just whatever. I was never that big into Asimov. It was one of those ones I didn't really get.
Not a question, just an appreciation post for all the content. During the pandemic, I was dealing with some major depression and isolation issues, and this content was one of the few reasons I had to get out of bed and listen to while I went for a walk. Thank you for this content. It pulled me off the edge. You're welcome, man. I mean, I've always said this. Being in entertainment can feel kind of meaningless and nihilistic at times because you don't feel that, or at least for me, I don't always feel that I'm making an effect. So when people have these kind of reactions to the content, I'm glad it made a difference in your life. You know, it makes me feel better about the work that I do. So I hope you're doing better now. And for those of you who are experiencing something similar, remember, you can always go to people go to the people who are close to you and talk to them and, find a reason to keep on going and get motivated if possible. Right. So thanks. A bit of comment / question here. Appreciate you both in the content. It's been fantastic. Mostly for Monty and referring to past Q&As. First off, a few shows ago, you mentioned enjoying A24 stuff. If you haven't seen After Sun yet, I'd highly recommend. I have not, but I have heard of it. Second, where to go next with Cormac. Recently read Blood Meridian. Was curious where I'd go next. I would read the Border Crossing trilogy. So all the Pretty Horses, The Crossing, and Cities on the Plain. I think The Crossing is just, the second book of that series is just phenomenal. But obviously, like, there's also No Country for Old Men. I have not yet read his two most recent books before he died, The Passenger and Stella Maris. But I will be reading those. But I would say the Border Crossing trilogy is super, super solid. For Thorin, fuck Man City. That's it. Okay. Inside the world of Dune, which character are you or were, and which character do you aspire to be or use to guide your aim, if any? I'm not sure either of those applies to me, really. But
the funny thing is, it's actually one of the weird things about my life that does make me think some parts of reality just don't hold together. You know, I've told you that mad detail that it's actually pure fluke that my alias is Thorin. That wasn't a name I picked and decided like I'm going to use. I told you I would just use random names of like Greek gods and stuff in like DMs in Quake. And one day I just forgot to change Thorin and I just did like 5 days in a row, whatever. And then people on the server referred to me as Thorin, so I just never changed it, right? But people think, Monty, when they look up Thorin Oakenshield and they find out my surname is Shields, they're like, I see what you did there. I see what you did. You picked the name Thorin because Shield. And it's like, no, that's actually purely coincidental. I never even thought of that at the time. In fact, my alias wasn't Thorin Oakenshield, it was just Thorin. So similarly, one aspect that I actually do find mad is that my favorite book series is Dune. And one of the only, spoiler, characters that repeats is a character called Duncan. He's called Duncan Idaho. But that actually had nothing to do with it either. Like, I never, by the way, whenever if I read like Macbeth, I don't really think Duncan, that's my name. Like, I'm not a moron. Like, it's just a character. But what's bizarre is that character character actually does have certain aspects that are very much like me as a person. Like, essentially, if people don't know, despite the character I play, I would very much be an Atreides character. I have like that sort of like loyalty, sense of familial duty, the notion you should be heroic and not be cruel to people, etc. But also, the thing about the Duncan character in later books, especially when he becomes like a mentat figure, is, to me, I actually think the mentat is like the best possible explanation of how I seem to think about esports and how my brain works. Because in that universe where they had the Butlerian Jihad and you can't ever have AI, you're not allowed to make machines that think. Essentially, they go the opposite direction. They find a way to make people think like machines. And so what the mentat does is he can sort of like model in his mind all data points and come up with patterns and things like that. And to me, that's what I've always done in esports. Like, that's what I try to do with like player performance. Essentially, if you don't know, guys, I make archetypes of types of players and I try and like find the correspondences. And I have actually found for real times where guessing, like, well, that's a bit like this sort of a player in this last version of the game. I'll sometimes ask like one of their teammates and they'll be like, yeah, how do you know that about him? Like, have you been talking to him? I'm like, no, it's just a guess I made based on like the sort of player he seems like. So I do think some of that is what I try to do, but it's actually just something I've thought about years later. Like, I never ever thought about any of this shit for the first 20 years or whatever.
Yeah, in terms of aspiration, I agree with you because I spend a lot of time thinking about chivalry and the expected duty and behavior of nobility, and so Leto Atreides is, a character that I probably identify with within that book. I keep hearing about how good Keen is these days. Given his current form, would he manage to win at least one game against his father, Licorice, in a potential rematch?
I mean, it's because of Season 8 Worlds.
Yeah. Look, Keen is banging these days, guys. I think to be fair, Licorice did much better than expected, both this split and improving his form heading into MSI and an MSI itself. But Keen is the only top lane hope against the Chinese top gods right now. Like, against Bin and 369, I think KT is the only team, and Keen is the only player that's going to be able to hang with some of these guys. Zeus is just too anti-clutch, and Doran is inting in lane right now.
It's actually sad that there's not better top laners. Remember, that was the original region for the carry top laner. That was where all the greats come from. The problem is, though, to be fair, people like Khan retired, Smeb fucked off ages ago. Like, a lot of the legends just went by the last 3-4 years, unfortunately.
The premise is that the book exists in their own fictional world where it can be read by the characters. Okay, so we have to pick a book that can be read by the characters in the book. So maybe Paul Atreides or Stilgar reads the Dune books, or you enter the Dune world as yourself, maybe as a Fremen journalist. Would the characters and story change for the better? So it's a well, that's a very interesting question. It's a meta question. So what would shift if the characters themselves? I mean, Dune is an interesting one just because of the craziness that happens that probably couldn't have been predicted by the characters, because obviously, like, Paul Atreides knowing about what would happen when his family moved to Arrakis and his own kind of son would be very intriguing. I'm not sure it would change anything, though, because isn't that what you want if you're Paul Atreides? Isn't that kind of, you know what I mean?
Well, also, technically, they did have prescience anyway, so they were already seeing the future in a way. So
That's a fair.
like, the joke is essentially Leto II did read Dune. He planned out thousands of years of what he was going to do. So in a way, he was Frank Herbert, right? In a fucked up sense. The problem with that one is the question's better than any answer. Like, there's not really, like, on the spot, we can't come up with some like god tier fucking world that would read a book or whatever. I think the funnier one to me would be something like this. It would be like, pick a book that's like archetypal to a famous play or something like that. And it's more like they get to read the play, like a Shakespearean play in it that has parallels to their life. But do they make the connection, or do they just see it as like idle, fucking entertainment or something like that? That would be a cool angle, I think.
Yeah. And also, I think that knowing a character knowing the outcome, people always feel that they have agency in order to change it, or are unwilling to see the flaws in their character that might result in that outcome. So possibly the characters would just be too arrogant and it would just become a self-fulfilling prophecy anyway. Monte, I noticed you dropped Wagner as a composer that you like. So question for both of you, are there other classical composers you like, or any particular eras you like? I mean, I still like Wagner. I mean, I like the high period of Italian opera. I'm a Verdi fan. I like Beethoven a lot. Any that you particularly enjoy?
Are we counting like he means like actual class? It can't be like Hans Zimmer or something, right?
I mean, sure, whatever.
Because I
It's
think some
classical
of the
music.
movie soundtrack guys are unbelievable. I think some of them are
Oh
mega.
yeah.
There's
I
not
mean,
that
John
many
Williams is
actual
amazing.
classical people. Like I've got a couple I've got for you. There's a guy called Arvo Part, did some interesting stuff. It's sort of very sentimental stuff from the 70s. There was a guy called Henrik Gorecki. He did some like very moving stuff. Yeah, there you go. There's a couple for you.
What are your thoughts on the Daniel Craig Bond era? Did you enjoy it? Where does he rank among the Bond actors for you? Well, I did like Daniel Craig as Bond quite a bit. I think he did a really good job. As for the era, because it was a really big reset. I've seen all the Bond movies, by the way. So I have an affinity for James Bond as a series, even though I like hate watch a lot of them. The problem is with Bond is that the tonal shift between the Pierce Brosnan era and the Daniel Craig era was obviously immense. Like they really with Casino Royale went back and made it more like they obviously tried to make it more realistic in quotes, obviously, but compared to Pierce Brosnan doing like ridiculous shit like surfing giant waves on aircraft wreckage or whatever the fuck was going on, some of those terrible super cheesy late Pierce Brosnan one where he's like breaking the fourth wall at the time and like winking at the camera basically. I thought it was an interesting way to take the series into a more like kind of Jason Bourne-esque like spy thriller, which was more popular at the time that those movies came out. I thought Casino Royale was really good, but a lot of the other movies have been kind of hit or miss, and they did eventually kind of like veer back into the silly territory by the time the later like Daniel Craig Bond movies occurred. I liked I think I like Casino Royale and Skyfall the best. I thought they were the most interesting ones. What was the No Time to Die was the one with Remy Malek, right? That was a little bit over the top and cheesy, but you have to expect that with Bond. Like it's gonna like being pretty fucking ridiculous is just part of it. Where does he rank?
Oh, go on.
No, where does he rank among Bond actors? He's one of my favorite Bond actors, I would say.
Here's the alternative take. I actually think the Daniel Craig James Bond films fucking suck. But to a man, from start to finish, I think Casino Royale is one of the worst movies I've ever seen at the cinema. And the reason why is, like you say, one, the tonal shift is dog shit. All he did is go, hey, you know how like Jason Bourne's like spies, but if they were like in real life and having all the mental problems they have, what if James Bond's like that? Like, why would you take the one character where the whole premise is artifice, that he isn't that he's cool and has swagger and demeanor and is somewhere sort of evocative of what you imagine British intelligence would be like at the high? Why would you take that and put that into a gritty real world where he's just like, oh, what's going on? And then also that the movie itself was a humiliation ritual for fucking men, because the whole premise is you have James Bond, the coolest guy ever who can do everything. Every conversation with a woman is him just getting fucking cocked 24/7. They're doing the snappy one-liner on him. His boss is telling him, you fucked up, Bond. What are you doing? Like, it's so whack. It's like just him being middle managed to death by an arsehole from Evil Geniuses. Like, I thought it fucking sucked. Then I'll throw this in there. If you think about the old James Bond, they combined being suave, but having a little bit of humor, being unrealistic because they're fantasy plots with crazy bad guys.
Yeah.
But at the same time, you have some aspects of like cool fighting and stuff. So to me, I actually don't, I think Daniel Craig could have been really good if they'd have done it decades earlier as real James Bond. He could have played the part very well. But I actually think I would put him very low at the bottom. Like if you look at the actors, the actual best Bond, if we're talking about all factors, probably is Pierce Brosnan, because he just actually nailed like the look, the demeanor. He got it that era. He nailed like
he was style. Good. It's just the movies were really bad. I mean, I like GoldenEye, but the thing about the Pierce Brosnan era was it was so 90s cheesy. You know what I mean? And I appreciate some of that, like especially some of the earlier ones. But by the end of the Pierce Brosnan era, it was just like it was ridiculous, even by Bond standards.
The problem is, technically, the best actor was obviously Sean Connery. It's just that to me, his are the first movies, so there's not the best movies is all. I actually think the best Bond movies are the Roger Moore ones. He's not like the best actor, but he's good. He knows how to do the kitsch.
Oh,
And those
I
just are
hate
the best
Roger
plots.
Moore.
Those plots are amazing for those Bond ones. Those are the ones with like Goldfinger and all that shit. Some of them are really good plots. And then Roger Dalton even was all right in the one he was in.
Timothy Dalton.
Terrible
Yeah.
Timothy Dalton, whatever.
Timothy Dalton was, unfortunately, we didn't get more movies because he actually could have been, I think, the greatest. Yeah, he was super good in the movies he was in.
So I'm a certified Daniel Craig hater. Fuck him.
The problem with the Roger Moore movies is like, I mean, some of them are among the worst Bond films. Like Moonraker is such an unbelievable,
what an amazing plot.
No, it's a piece of shit. That movie's
sick plot.
Moonraker. Oh my god!
You know what? Earlier in this episode, we will talk about fucking anime. Look, you're they tell me how Moonraker's a ridiculous plot, but Neon Genesis Evangelion's reasonable. Like a 14-year-old kid.
Dude,
psychological profiling or help. It's just told to pilot a mech to save the world. Otherwise, like, just fuck off while this penguin eats out of the fridge. And then we're gonna go Moonraker. I'm drawing the line. That's ridiculous.
I am drawing the line at Moonraker. Moonraker with Jaws, and he's like chewing through.
Shit. Jaws is
chewing through some fucking like cable cars, cables, and then they're just like shooting lasers in space. Fuck that movie. That's one of the worst Bond movies.
You have Casino Royale, the remake. I'll have Moonraker. There you go.
Man with the Golden Gun also is just fucking terrible. And also
great plot. He has a gun and he just shoots you with that one bullet, and he's like the god and it's Christopher Lee. Well, you don't. Here's the problem: Monty doesn't know what it was like to watch Bond, because you watch James Bond. It's always a rerun on like Saturday afternoon at like 3 p.m. when it's like slightly warm.
Fucking like James Bond.
You start watching that. It's the shit. It's the shit.
I was gonna say, like, some of those Roger Moore movies actually have aged relatively well. So I rewatched A View to a Kill recently, which is the one where Christopher Walken, young Christopher Walken, is the villain, and it is like incredibly stupid and incredibly hilarious. Where they're like, basically the plot of this movie is Christopher Walken is trying to flood Silicon Valley, and they end up in like a blimp fight over the Golden Gate Bridge.
I love it. Meanwhile, I'll just say this. Here's also why it doesn't work. Because there was one moment they attempted humor in your James Bond, the remake. That moment in Casino Royale where they're torturing him and he goes, "You're just fucking tickling my balls." Like, that's one of the worst cringe scenes I've ever seen in my entire life. I wanted to claw my own eyes out and get a refund and not be born at the same time.
I will admit that my reaction to Casino Royale, so what I liked about it was that it was like a smaller stakes version, because it was like the new Bond, and kind of a I know it's Bond, so the word subtlety may not apply here, but as far as Bond standards go, it was a more subtle plot that was in mostly one location around this like poker tournament, and I think served as kind of an introduction. And the plots obviously got way more epic and silly in the Daniel Craig movies as it went along. But I liked the more like kind of Daniel Craig stoic Bond. But I do agree with you. There's something to be said about peak Pierce Brosnan when he is just like so handsome, so charming, so witty and fun. It's just the movies like were really terrible by the end. I did like Goldeneye a lot, though, as I said, and I did like Tomorrow Never Dies, this stealth boat movie with Michelle Yeoh.
There's one thing I will give one little olive branch to the modern Bond, which is, when we famously bonded because we both thought the OG classic actress was obviously Jennifer Connelly.
Oh, yeah.
Eva Green is also...
Oh, yeah, incredibly attractive.
10 out of 10. Easy. Easy.
Yeah. It's an interesting question about Bond. Like I said, I actually have been going back in the last probably 6 months, and like I said, I watched A View to a Kill again recently, and it was just like so ridiculous and fun. And I actually watched Tomorrow Never Dies again recently.
Well, here's the obvious thing to do, Monty. There needs to be a season of us watching. We have to recommend Bond films to each other, and then we have to see what people's responses are.
I mean, we could just go through all the Bond movies. I have absolutely no trouble doing that. I love some of the old the original Sean Connery ones as well. Like, I love Goldfinger, Diamonds Are Forever, Thunderball. These are all great. Also, the music is just fantastic. Even into the modern era, it's so cool because they get so many of these really huge pop stars to do these songs. I mean, getting Chris Cornell to do the Casino Royale theme. I love that theme. I love that they got Adele to do Skyfall. This is really great shit. It's fun. It's fun to go back and watch Bond because you get to see all like some really huge musical artists from their eras, and it's like a trip through musical history at the same time. It's great.
Plus, that was back when Adele's name carried a lot of weight. Whatever. Just keep going. Keep rolling.
So in an alternate universe, you are a surgeon who puts his profession above all else, and one day you save the life of a kid who turns out to be an evil incarnate serial murderer. Okay, this is the plot of Monster. Many years have passed since and loads of heinous crimes were committed by the individual, and he appears in front of you gravely injured. Do you save his life once again? I mean, the answer is, if you've taken the Hippocratic Oath, the answer is yes. Right? You are not the person whose duty it is to judge these people. Your job is a healer, and I think that's one of it's the nobility of the medical profession, right?
I mean, the real problem to me with the show's house and what happened to the world over the last 4 years is this notion that doctors became God and they just get to like choose what they. These people shouldn't be allowed healthcare. What are you talking about, you lunatic? Like Monty says, you're essentially supposed to be like a fucking field medic who's just there for some holy reason to save lives. It's not for you to judge who they are, what they're there for, what reasons. But would it be right to do it? So in this scenario, by that logic, you actually even though you know they're a heinous person, should do it. That's part for me of being a doctor. Like, if you're not going to do that, do some other gig.
Also, shout out to Monster, which if you want an anime show that has none of the weird ass anime shit that we talked about earlier, no like random fridge penguins, that's a very
don't look anything up
show.
about it. Don't look up any spoilers.
Yes.
Just watch it fresh out the gate. There's an example, by the way, actually, of where people suck at recommended anime. They're too busy telling you to watch Dragon Ball Z and then Naruto, then One Piece. It's like, they never say a show like that. Like, the Monster one's way better than all those. What are you talking about? Start with this. Start with this one.
Monster's great. I hope you never forget this. It's a link to my Prowess of Najin parody from Colors of the Wind by Pocahontas. So for those of you guys who don't know, I used to write just like silly parody lyrics to like songs, and some of them were Disney songs. And it was an application of my unfortunate education in poetry that I am just extremely good at getting rhyme and meter correct in these songs. I enjoy doing them. They're funny. Congrats to my English degree. That's it. You guys can go back and watch it. That's a great one, though. That one turned out really hilarious. If you could make your own fast food chain or restaurant, what would it look like?
I mean, one thing I do think is mega underrated is how many restaurants aren't actually made with comfort as one of the factors that people would want. Like, for example, I've always thought some of that, like one of the problems in a lot of Western countries is a lot of them have that law for smoking where you can't smoke indoors and all that sort of crap. Because to me, why no one has ever done like a baller sort of like weed cafe or something with like fucking proper, like, I want it to be like a fucking opium den for an emperor in the 16th century Monty. I want to be on like fluffy things with like fucking bring the music guy, go, ding, ding, and then fucking drinks and sherbets coming in. It's a haze. It's basically like that scene for fucking
Turkish lights while you wear your turban.
when that weird guy was in that fucking tent of like Cersei and all the like fucking goat-headed people like, smoke this shit, motherfucker. Like, I want it to be like that. I want it to be sensationalist. Sensualist.
That's your fast food chain.
There you go. And I'm just eating burgers and fucking
the weed Ottoman Empire crossover that we all need.
There you go. That's what
I want. For me, on the fast food chain idea, I would create something that Thorin would probably hate, which is Mexican Korean fusion. If you haven't had fucking kimchi carne asada quesadillas, guys, you are missing the fuck out. That shit is delicious. Kimchi and tacos is delicious. Bulgogi tacos are delicious.
Imagine bulgogi would be delicious in a taco if you did it right.
Great. Yeah. It's great. You can do really cool stuff. And like, obviously chefs have been doing, Korean Mexican fusion for a while because a lot of the building blocks of the cuisine are very similar, but turning that into like a global fast food chain would be absolutely banging. So
Obviously, the main problem is just that they can't say the word fusion in Korea.
That's true. It's a tough word to say if you're used to speaking Korean. They have no F or Z sounds. Bummer. Bummer. All right. That was the last question. We got through them all this week. Thanks a lot for watching, guys. We will be back with another episode of SI next week.